On her first day of work, this girl slapped the deceased's best friend. The deceased's grandmother and mother quickly stopped her, because the woman who was hit was the deceased's best friend. Just as the woman was about to be hit again, the deceased's husband rushed out and hugged the woman. It turned out that when the deceased was seriously ill in bed, her husband was already entangled with this woman. Doyern had to teach this shameless woman a lesson in front of everyone. Then she even threw the indecent photos of the two of them on the ground. Thus, a good funeral turned into a farce. It turned out that Doyern could see people who had already passed away and hear their inner voices. She was a newly hired mortician. Her boss, Don Hyuk, who had been in the job for so many years, had never seen anyone beat up the best friend of the deceased at a funeral before. However, he did not mean to scold Doyern, because the mortician's duty was to let the deceased depart peacefully. The boss praised Doyern for doing a good job today. Although it was interesting to hear the last words of others and receive their gratitude, Doyern realized after hearing so many that there were so many crazy and asshole people. The priest comforted her, saying that as long as she met with him 15 more times, it would all be over by autumn. At the same time, he gave Doyern a can of beer. On the street at 7 a.m., everyone tacitly avoided this woman drinking. On the other side, a little boy happily ran into the middle of the road, and a car was speeding towards him. Fortunately, he was protected by a man in a volunteer's uniform, so no major accidents occurred. The boy's mother hurried over to thank the man. Then he handed the other person a business card for Queen's Mart. At that moment, the green light came on. Inwo and Doyern passed each other for the first time. Soon, the news of Queen's Mart's opening spread through the mother's parent group. What attracted them most was not the fact that they could help with errands, but the handsome appearance of the man. The opening day was very popular. Mothers who came to admire the place scrambled to find out about the store's services. The store can free up the hands of mothers. Take out the trash and sort it. It can also save parents' time. It can take care of pets. The manager can even deliver water to your door. Who can resist a handsome water delivery man who exudes masculine charm in the hot summer sun? Not only that, the store provides a service for women seeking proof to collect evidence of their husband's infidelity. That day, Doyern consulted her boss, lying that she had a friend who was celebrating the 100th day anniversary with her boyfriend today. But her boyfriend had not contacted her and was in a state of complete disappearance. Her boss guessed that the person was Doyern. He also guessed that Doyern had already told the other person her occupation. Her boss confessed that he had a girlfriend he had been in love with for 20 years, but because of his occupation, his girlfriend's father particularly disliked him. In the end, his girlfriend chose to marry someone else. At this time, Doyern received a message from her boyfriend replying that he would meet her tomorrow. The next day, Doyern dressed up nicely and happily went on the date with a gift to commemorate the occasion. However, the person who came was Inwo from the Queen's shop. It turned out that night, her boyfriend had found Inwo to run an errand and deliver the news of their breakup. The reason for the breakup was that he disliked Doyern's hands. When he thought about Doyern's occupation, her boyfriend felt that holding hands was terrifying. Doyern heard this and took her hand off the table. When the manager was about to leave, Doyern stopped him and paid him 50,000 won for his trouble. Then she gave the manager a hard kick. The manager, who had been kicked, was angry and said that he had only delivered the message. He then introduced the errand service at the store. When he said that they did not provide violent or illegal services, Doyern interrupted and said that they were murderers. There are more ways to kill someone than with violence or murder. Sometimes a word can also be used as a tool to kill. Her hands would not rejoice at the thought of getting a little money, and she would never let someone lose their last bit of dignity. Her boyfriend's way of thinking was truly shameless and pathetic. Doyern tore up the business card with her own hands and threw away the gift. At the same time, she also threw away the love that belonged to her. That night, when Doyern was washing her hands, she looked at her hands and froze. She was supposed to be an outstanding table tennis player. She had played for 12 years since the 3rd grade of elementary school. However, she lost a game due to an accidental sprained ankle and ended her career, so she chose to work in a funeral home. The reason was simple: a mortician could work for at least 40 years. However, her supervisor asked her if she was afraid. In fact, this job was not as simple as she thought. She had to use her hands to clean the faces of the deceased. When Doyern touched the little boy, the whole room changed. Before she knew it, she was startled by the little boy sitting up behind her. She fled the funeral home like crazy. However, ever since then, Doyern could often hear the little boy calling out to her, thinking she was possessed. Her father took her to a temple to pray, but when her father learned that she worked in a funeral home, he felt the same shame as most people. However, after calming down, he hugged his only daughter and said, "You were just scared. It will get better after a while." Autumn came and went. Whenever Doyern tried to forget about it, the little boy's voice would always ring in her ears. Moreover, her luck seemed to have taken a turn for the worst. She had become the unluckiest person in the world. Doyern sought help from the priest. However, the priest said, returning to that place may be the best solution. However, Doyern would never want to go back to the funeral home. As she was leaving the church, she tripped and fell. Doyern decided to go back to find out why. At the same time, she made a wish in her heart: if she treats every deceased person seriously, please let her leave here. After Doyeon finished dressing up her deceased grandmother, the counter in the dressing room changed from 21 to 20. It seemed as if heaven had heard her wish. In other words, Doyeon only had to serve 20 more people before she could leave the funeral home. That day, a kind-hearted driver died in a car accident after picking up a fare. When he heard from Doyeon that he had died, he still didn't want to believe it. He begged Doyeon to save him. His family's laundry was still hanging out to dry and the trash hadn't been taken out. Most importantly, he wanted to see his son. 25 years ago, the driver had been offered a chance to make some money, but he had to go abroad for 3 months and asked his half-brother to look after his son. The boy's mother had passed away, and he had no one else to trust but this so-called brother. The driver took out a wad of money and implored his brother to take care of his son. He said goodbye. However, having lost his mother at a young age, how could the boy bear to be separated from his father for long? The boy desperately clung to him, not wanting to be separated for even a second. The driver pushed the boy away with all his strength and ran away. The boy chased after him without even bothering to put on his shoes. He happened to bump into someone carrying a pot of boiling water. His entire arm instantly swelled up from the hot soup. The driver wanted to rush back to see how his son was. However, the weight of life reminded him not to do that. He took a step back. He looked at his crying son, who kept calling out "Daddy" over and over again. He became a bad father in other people's eyes. However, when he returned, his son had already wandered off under the supervision of his older brother. The driver searched every city in the country for 25 whole years, but never found his son. He suddenly looked at Doyeon and wanted to let Doyeon complete this missing person. Because the driver felt that Doyeon could see the deceased, maybe there would be a miracle. On the other side of the funeral, it was cold and quiet. Apart from the brother and sister-in-law, there were no other mourners. In fact, the two deliberately did this because they embezzled the compensation money of their deceased brother and planned to use it to go traveling. The sister-in-law mentioned inadvertently that her brother's son was heard by Doyeon nearby. The brother, thinking he was rich, wanted to get his wife a new phone and threw the old one away. Doyeon went over to the phone and tapped it with her foot to get it out, but there was no information about the child in the contacts. So Doyeon used the most stupid method to pull the banner. Coincidentally, her actions were seen by the store manager passing by. That night after work, the brother and sister-in-law left the funeral home early and didn't even consider keeping watch. Doyeon went to the priest instead. She felt that the driver's son was not to be found. However, the priest told her that when you start to believe, then miracles can happen. Doyeon returned to the funeral home with a vague understanding. She saw a person standing at the entrance to the driver's condolence hall. This person was bowing his head as if he were crying. Doyeon approached step by step. At the same time, this person also turned around. It turned out that this person was the store manager Inwoo. Doyeon saw that he had a burn scar on his hand. She was convinced that this person was the driver's son. It seems that the priest wasn't lying when he said that miracles do happen. And Inwoo suddenly remembered that Doyeon was the woman who had dumped him on his first day of work. But there was a misunderstanding between the two of them. Inwoo mistakenly thought that the person who placed the order was Doyeon, and Doyeon thought that Inwoo was referring to the banner. So Inwoo was immersed in the grief of losing his father, while Doyeon was smiling happily. She thought she had fulfilled the driver's wish. The situation was extremely awkward. Then Doyeon brought a bowl of steaming jjajangmyeon. She had heard the driver say that his son loved this food. At that moment, Doyeon received a call from her father. He was a little worried that she hadn't returned home yet. It was obvious that Doyeon had hidden the fact that she was still working at the funeral home. Late at night, Inwoo was too sad to sleep at the wake. Doyeon was next door. She was very happy that Inwoo had come to see his father off for the last time. Early the next morning, Doyeon was mesmerized by Inwoo. However, Inwoo suddenly opened his eyes, which scared Doyeon so much that she immediately stood up. In order to relieve the awkwardness, the two had to engage in awkward conversation. Just then, his supervisor informed them that the funeral was about to start, but they couldn't get in touch with the driver's brother. Doyeon had long suspected that the driver's brother was unreliable, but now Inwoo could replace the family. However, he left the funeral home directly at 7 o'clock. Inwoo's errand running order has been completed, and now he insists on going back. Doyeon says he understands how he feels. You've been abandoned for 25 years, and now you can't accept this reality. But after all, your father is now dead. I hope you can give your father a proper send-off. Unexpectedly, Inwoo insists that he is not the driver's son. When he saw that the driver's public information did not have the name of a family member, he looked very angry. All signs indicate that Inwoo is the driver's son. Inwoo ignored Doyeon's persuasion and turned around and left. However, on the way back to the store, he finally couldn't resist the blood relationship and turned back to the funeral home. The boss also couldn't understand what was going on in this young man's mind. He was obviously just an errand boy, but he was highly dedicated. Inwoo asked his father's colleagues about his father. The colleagues said that his father was a good man. When I met your father was looking for his son. Unfortunately, he has not been able to find him to this day. Your father's missing persons poster is always with him and is stuck on the back seat of his car. After the funeral, Doyeon stopped Inwoo and said something inexplicable. What did you eat today? The story of when your own mother left. Inwo had no idea what she was talking about. The two were just about to leave, but Doyeon couldn't hold back. In fact, she wanted to tell Inwo that the driver's brother did not attend the funeral and embezzled the driver's insurance money, and Inwo was the legal beneficiary. Up until this point, Inwo still insisted that he was not the driver's son. It so happened that his boss, Doyeon, got into the car to chat with him. Their conversation came to an abrupt end. On the way back, Inwo saw an orange car pass by. He suddenly remembered seeing it the day he saw the banner. He also saw it on the way to the cemetery. Doyeon's birthday should have been a happy day, but she was frowning. Her father, who was busy in the kitchen, was also sighing. It turned out that 25 years ago today, his father received two notices while holding the newborn Doyeon in his arms. One was her daughter's birth certificate. The other was the certificate of her wife's death in childbirth. The young father cried uncontrollably in the hospital. When Doyeon grew up and understood things, every time it was her birthday, she would lock herself in the bathroom and practice over and over again the sentence she would never use, "Mommy." Doyeon blamed herself deeply, thinking that her birth had killed her mother. So every time it was her birthday, she deliberately didn't eat at home. Her father packed her lunch of boiled kelp soup and told her to go out and eat. For some reason, Doyeon felt that the lunchbox was always heavy. After sending his daughter away, the father muttered to the empty seat across from him. The father said that Doyeon had the shadow of his wife in every way. He kept his promise and made kelp soup for her every birthday, but he wondered if Doyeon would drink it. At this time, Inwo saw an orange car driving towards the cemetery and followed it. In front of the grave of the deceased driver stood a young man, and this young man was the real son of the driver. Inwo handed the young man half of the photo. It turned out that 25 years ago, the date that his father had promised the young man had arrived, but he never saw his father come to pick him up. The damned uncle told the young man that it was your father who didn't want you, after being adopted and then abandoned again and again. The young man began to hate his father. He hoped that he would become even more unfortunate than himself until he was satisfied. That day, he mustered the courage to get into the taxi driven by his father. The driver tried his best to describe what his son looked like at the time, and told the young man to call him if he saw someone who resembled his son. The driver always believed that he would find his son one day, even if it was just before he died. He firmly believed that as long as there was hope, there would be a miracle. At this time, the son in the back seat had already cried into a tearful person. The driver also said that since his son was lost, he had never eaten fried noodles, because he promised his son to eat them together when they met. In fact, this meeting was the last time the father and son would see each other. The torn photo was finally restored to its original state, just like the heart that was looking for his son was forgiven. The young man sat on the ground in grief, regretting that he had not recognized his father sooner. The number on the makeup room sign had changed from 15 to 14. I think the driver must have seen a miracle too. Afterwards, Inwo took the young man to the restaurant to eat the noodles. Just then, Inwo received a text message from Doyeon reminding him to fight to get the insurance money. Inwo called Doyeon and tried hard to explain that he was not the driver's son. Doyeon was curious as to why he had cried in the funeral hall. In fact, fate is really a strange thing. It turned out that 8 years ago, Inwo was eating at this restaurant and forgot his wallet. It was the driver who paid for him. Perhaps the driver saw the scar on Inwo's hand and mistook him for his son. That afternoon, Inwo went to the columbarium and wiped the glass of a deceased child. This child was the one who had been pestering Doyeon. It so happened that he met Doyeon's father. On the way back, Inwo gave Doyeon's father a ride back to the city. The two strangers became like long-lost friends because of the deceased. Doyeon's father saw that Inwo was a little sad and comforted him, saying that his wife had been here for 25 years and was considered an old hand. She had a kind heart and would definitely take care of the people who came after her. The mood of the two men eased slightly. Doyeon's father also said that his daughter was busy studying for exams. In fact, Doyeon was busy as hell at the funeral home. That night, after Inwo dropped Doyeon's father off at home, he stopped by a food stall to have a drink. The man next to him had drunk too much and collapsed. Out of the kindness of his heart, Inwo drove the man home. In the car, the drunk man laughed and cried at the same time. He laughed because he had just earned 100 million won. He cried because his wife was greedy. The man planned to give the money to his wife on her birthday. I don't know if it was because he was tired or because of the alcohol, but the man quickly fell asleep. The world of adults is often a world of sorrow and joy, where people know their own hearts. On the one hand, they are on the verge of collapse, and on the other, they have to heal themselves. On Doyeon's birthday, he met Inwo at the crosswalk carrying the seaweed soup his father cooked for him. She was still more concerned about whether Inwo had recovered the compensation money or not. Just as Inwo tried to explain, the green light came on. A little boy accidentally bumped into Inwo. Due to the inertia, Inwo hit Doyeon again, and her lunchbox fell to the ground, spilling the soup. Inwo didn't know that this soup meant a lot to Doyeon. However, a passerby kicked the lunchbox. At this moment, the green light turned red. The cars honked their horns, urging Doyeon to leave. Inwo saw this and hurriedly went up to apologize. Bowing, she wanted to make the cars stop. The two of them stood on the road in the midst of the traffic. Inwo kept apologizing. Doyeon also clearly said it was okay. However, Inwo intended to give her some money as compensation. At this time, Doyeon became a little anxious. She said that there are some things in the world that money can't buy. She also said that Inwoo is someone who helps others deliver breakup messages for money. No wonder he was only willing to attend his father's funeral after receiving money. Inwoo thought that such words were a bit heavy, so they argued in the middle of the road. However, a terrible internet storm was about to begin. Someone recognized Inwoo as the manager of a department store. The rumor spread from a young couple arguing to a girlfriend being abused. In the end, Inwoo became a scumbag who cheats for money and sex. The news spread instantly among the WeChat groups of mothers, who accused the store of being unreliable. Canceling the errand service by text message was like a flood. That day, they received hundreds of cancellation calls. After learning the whole story, the boss angrily scolded Inwoo for playing around. Because of a bowl of seaweed soup, our store is going to close down. He ordered Inwoo to immediately return the errand fee given by Doyeon, and to definitely get the other party's forgiveness to salvage the store's image. However, Doyeon was still angry and didn't want to take Inwoo's call. After a while, the boss had to go to the only place that hadn't cancelled the order to work. Inwoo grabbed the car keys and went instead of his uncle. On the other side, Doyeon's father Donhyuk took a part-time job as a security guard. The owner asked him to help park the car in the designated parking space. However, Donhyuk's skills were not good. He failed to park the car in the designated space several times. Unsurprisingly, an accident still occurred. A large piece of paint was scratched off the side door. As an apology, Donhyuk brought a box of juice to ask the owner for forgiveness and was willing to bear all losses. The owner did not make things difficult for him. He just said some harsh things and asked him to get rid of the garbage at home. It so happened that he ran into Inwoo putting up small ads. The two of them had met once before. They met when paying tribute to their loved ones. On the way downstairs, Donhyuk received a call from his daughter, and Inwoo realized that Doyeon was actually his daughter. He learned from Donhyuk that today was Doyeon's birthday. Donhyuk had finally managed to make the soup. Inwoo felt remorseful upon hearing this. That night, in order to complete the errands of handing out flyers, Inwoo came up with a good idea. At this time, Doyeon did not go home and lie to her father that she was having a meal with friends. In fact, she was hiding in a store and did not go out with her friends. Doyeon just wanted to be alone. At this time, she noticed a cartoon character across the street. A group of kids gathered around the character and pulled off its tail. After being bullied for a while, he knelt down to find his tail and attach it. Just then, the character also saw Doyeon, and the bear inside was Inwoo. He remembered Donhyuk saying that today was Doyeon's birthday, so Inwoo came to Doyeon's window and improvised a hot dance, but it was really embarrassing. Doyeon chose to leave. Inwoo quickly caught up to her and handed her a flyer with sweets printed on it and then hurriedly ran away. Uncle had long discovered that Inwoo was not doing his job and dancing to girls. Inwoo used the excuse of attracting everyone's attention to get away with it. That night when he returned home, Doyeon looked at the flyer in his hand. She saw the burn mark on the bear's hand and guessed that the person was Inwoo. Doyeon seemed to have forgiven him. The camera panned to the father and daughter sitting together. Doyeon made a wish on the cake, hoping that her father could find a girlfriend. Meanwhile, Inwoo and his uncle, who had returned home, also received a text message that they had been forgiven, and agreed to repay the money to themselves when they met next time. The next day, his reputation improved and the store received errand orders to help the client's sister, who had already taken care of her husband, pack her belongings. But when Inwoo opened the closet, he was so scared that he sat down with his butt on the floor. Doyeon was sitting inside, and she gave him a hand signal to keep quiet. Then she quickly closed the closet door. It turned out that Doyeon had met the 14th ghost, who asked her to help find a sum of money and give it to his wife. Doyeon sneaked into his house as her brother had instructed. She planned to start looking in the closet, when she suddenly heard the door code sound again. Meanwhile, Inwoo, who was running errands, saw the photo hanging in the living room, and he recalled that this person was none other than his drunk older brother from the other day. The older brother's lover felt very guilty. She muttered to herself that not only had she not earned a single penny, she had also always nagged her husband to earn more. What a wife who knows nothing about understanding and is useless. Her younger sister comforted her. Although you didn't earn any money, you did contribute to the family. Besides, her brother-in-law didn't leave a penny behind. Inwoo suddenly remembered that his brother had clearly said that he would give his wife a check for 100 million won. However, the family all thought that his brother was talking nonsense, so the employer asked Inwoo to start tidying up the room. This is why Inwoo was scared by Doyeon and sat on the floor just now. The employer, who rushed over upon hearing the sound, thought that the floor hadn't been cleaned properly and planned to mop it again. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Inwoo asked Doyeon what she did here. However, she was afraid to speak, so she typed a few words on her phone, saying that she had done nothing wrong. Seeing that the employer was about to walk into the room, Inwoo still kept asking. Doyeon kicked him hard and he fell to the ground. After a while, the employer planned to take her sister out for a walk and asked Inwoo if he could clean up alone. Inwoo gritted his teeth and decided to hide the fact that Doyeon was also here. After the employer's sisters left, Doyeon searched recklessly. She said that there was a white shirt box in the house with a check for 100 million won inside. This time she came to find the money and give it to the deceased's wife. In-woo questioned her on how she knew about the money. Doyeon couldn't admit that she could see the dead. She didn't explain much, just emphasized that the money was in the white shirt box. In-woo thought that Doyeon was sneaking around like a robber. Just then, he received a call from his uncle. Today, except for this order, all other contracts have been cancelled. In other words, once this order is completed, the store will have to close. However, when he hung up the phone and turned around, Doyeon had already turned the house upside down. In-woo really couldn't stand such behavior. He tried to persuade Doyeon nicely to stop what he was doing. However, Doyeon simply ignored what he said and continued to search diligently in every corner. On the other side, the priest found Doyeon's father. It turned out that the priest was Doyeon's uncle. Meanwhile, In-woo accidentally got a box containing a white shirt. However, there was nothing in it. In-woo now believed that Doyeon was lying. He grabbed her hand and was about to throw her out. However, Doyeon said that she had just looked in the shoe cabinet and would leave immediately. In-woo helplessly called the employer and asked her to come back. Coincidentally, the employer had forgotten her car keys and was almost at the door. Meanwhile, they heard the sound of entering the code. Doyeon tried to hide, but In-woo resolutely blocked her way. Just as the door opened, the flower pot accidentally fell to the ground. Looking at the messy house, the employer was shocked. While cleaning up, she complained that she shouldn't have trusted the business card her brother-in-law had in his pocket and that she should have found a better housekeeping company. However, In-woo, who felt guilty, accidentally cut her hand while sorting through the debris. The employer intended to help her treat the wound with a sticker, but she didn't know that an even messier situation was waiting for her. Before the employer could get angry, she heard a slight noise. It turned out to be the sound of Doyeon rummaging around. The employer was afraid that In-woo was messing up the house, so she decided to check it out herself. Just then, she received a call from her sister, who said she didn't want to go on a walk anymore. In order to take care of her sister's mood, the two of them escaped disaster. In-woo was about to denounce Doyeon when she didn't expect Doyeon to actually find the check. Doyeon said that if you promise not to tell anyone about what happened today, I will give you the check and give it to your brother's wife. The camera panned to the wife, who was very sad holding the check. It turned out that the employer almost threw the check away as trash. She apologized and thanked In-woo. However, In-woo had a message to convey to his brother's wife. I'm sorry I couldn't repay you sooner. In fact, this is what Doyeon told In-woo. His wife often complained that her husband didn't make enough money because she had a dream of becoming a billionaire. The husband, who drove a taxi, laughed out of happiness when he heard this. His wife asked what she would do if she had the money. She said she wanted to buy her daughter a piano and get rid of all her husband's old clothes and replace them with new ones. She also wanted to buy a few kilos of the best strawberries, the kind that didn't come on sale. The beautiful vision made the two of them laugh. If she really had the money, his wife still wanted to pay off the mortgage first. His husband took her hands seriously. The best kind of love is probably the kind where one person is busy working while the other is laughing. Unexpectedly, the wife's seemingly joking remark has now come true. Unfortunately, the person who had promised a good life with him has already passed away. The wife is holding the check for 100 million won in her hands and is crying so hard that she can't catch her breath. This seemingly rough guy also has a little romance in him. He has fulfilled his promise to his wife and left with that love. There should be no regrets, right? In-woo was also moved by them. On his way out, he met Doyeon, who had not yet left. In-woo was very curious about how she knew the password for the door and about the check, and there was the strangeness of meeting so many times. Doyeon said that her father had told her that men have no brains after the age of 40. There are many things in this world that cannot be understood. Doyeon told him to explain it clearly next time they meet. However, when In-woo turned to leave, Doyeon called out his name wrong and handed him a wound sticker. That night, In-woo looked at the wound sticker on his hand and felt that Doyeon was strange. However, his uncle thought it was strange that he was thinking about that woman. On the other side, his uncle, the priest, told Doyeon that he had accidentally told Doyeon's father that the two often met. In fact, Doyeon's father had long since discovered something was wrong in his daughter's closet, and that Doyeon's job at the funeral home might not be able to be kept secret. And you should not say that Doyeon looks quite a bit like her uncle. Meanwhile, during the day, her employer posted In-woo's act of returning lost property on the internet. The news quickly spread through the WeChat group of parents of preschoolers. All the previous negative news was reversed. Some even said that a handsome appearance would reflect the heart. The volume of orders at In-woo's store was like autumn leaves. He was too busy to keep up with the work. After a busy day, In-woo and his uncle went to a food stall to celebrate. Unexpectedly, his uncle received a call from his mother. His mother was afraid that he would lead In-woo astray and scolded him. In-woo, who had accidentally seen the wound protection stickers on his hands, called Doyeon out of the blue. He wanted to treat Doyeon to a barbecue as a thank you for finding the 100 million won. In-woo took out his ID card so that Doyeon could remember his name. He also claimed that it was fortunate that the driver's son had appeared and had also received his insurance money. Seeing the wound protection stickers on In-woo's hands, Doyeon wanted to give him a new pair, but she had already used up the ones in her bag. They ate and chatted. Doyeon claimed that she had been a mortician for 3 months. She told Inwoo that she planned to quit her job and take the civil service exam in the fall. Her father always thought that Doyeon was taking classes at school for the exam. Although they were not close, the two knew a lot of each other's secrets, so the two agreed not to tell Doyeon's father about their jobs. Inwoo seemed to have a changed impression of Doyeon. He used answering the phone as an excuse to go out for a while. After they finished eating, Inwoo handed Doyeon a box of wound stickers and lied that he had just picked them up on the way. The next morning, Doyeon realized that all her black clothes were gone because her father had thrown them away, afraid that she was still working as a mortician. At work, her boss immediately noticed that Doyeon had bought new clothes because the tags were still on. Doyeon lied that she had a new colleague today. On the other side, Doyeon's father ran into Inwoo at work and gave him a box of watermelon as a thank you for buying the cake. He also said that his daughter usually doesn't like cake, but she ate it with relish on her birthday. At the same time, the head of security informed Doyeon's father that he would have to start working night shifts next week. However, he has not yet told his daughter. That night, Doyeon returned home and saw her father sitting on the sofa wiping his tears. Her father looked at Doyeon's black suit and always felt that something was wrong. So Doyeon went to a friend's house to discuss how to keep the funeral home work from her father for the remaining 6 months. But they didn't seem to be able to come up with a good solution. When she left, her friend's grandmother, who had Alzheimer's, kept asking Doyeon to take an umbrella. She politely declined the old woman's kindness and left. On the way home, she saw 2 upperclassmen bullying a classmate. Doyeon unceremoniously wanted to teach the other party a lesson. She thought the 2 kids would be scared of her. Unexpectedly, they were big and strong, and Doyeon took a few steps back in fear. One of the boys raised his hand and was about to hit when, luckily, the police arrived in time to stop them. However, these 2 villains first reported that the other party had hit their heads. Seeing this, Doyeon ran away directly. During the escape, Doyeon saw a rental advertisement. She immediately went home and begged her father to move out for study reasons. In fact, Doyeon's father also had his own thoughts. The security guard's part-time job is about to start the night shift. If his daughter moves out, he won't have to explain to her. Although his father pretends to be unwilling, he is secretly very happy. I believe you have already guessed that the house Doyeon rents is right above Inwoo's shop, and the policeman from that night is also a tenant here. However, when Doyeon first moved in, Inwoo happened to go out running errands. He didn't know that Doyeon was the new tenant. The next day, a pregnant woman with morning sickness wanted to eat an apple. Because they had already run out of apples at home, her husband decided to go out and buy some. However, not long after he left, the pregnant woman heard the door open. She thought her husband had forgotten something, but in fact, danger was already approaching. Soon after, the news reported a home invasion and murder. The pregnant woman was Doyeon's 13th victim. The boss got the news from somewhere. The victim and her husband met at an orphanage. Perhaps they had no other relatives. Doyeon made a special trip to the maternity store to pick out a beautiful outfit for the unborn baby. Like everyone else, the pregnant woman asked the same question. After hearing the news of her death from Doyeon's mouth, her first concern was not her own life or death, but the baby she was carrying, which was due in 2 days. Doyeon could only say sorry with regret. The pregnant woman took Doyeon's hand and implored her to help her think of a way to let the baby be born, because the doctor had told the pregnant woman that the baby was healthy and would weigh more than 6 pounds. However, in the face of her desperate pleas, Doyeon really couldn't help. Then the pregnant woman collapsed to the ground, crying out in pain. Her husband was also immersed in grief. If she had been at home that day, her wife might not have been killed. He cried so hard that he could hardly catch his breath and almost fainted. When he came to his senses, he looked at the watch on his wrist. It was a gift from his girlfriend on the 100th day of their relationship. The two had promised to never part until death. The husband cried himself out in the restroom and then staggered to the funeral hall. After looking at his wife's portrait, he made up his mind to keep his promise. However, his wife also guessed what her husband was going to do. The pregnant woman was begging Doyeon to do something. She contacted her. Meanwhile, Inwoo, who was delivering food, heard voices in the dressing room. He slowly pushed open the door and saw that Doyeon, who was a mortician, was actually holding the body of the deceased, and Doyeon kept calling out the other person's name. This scared Inwoo. The two of them stared at each other for more than 10 seconds, both in a daze. Inwoo was the first to react. He was furious at Doyeon's disrespectful behavior and angrily turned around and left. Doyeon hurriedly chased after him and stopped him, saying that the deceased wanted to have a last phone call with her husband. But how could such a supernatural phenomenon be explained? Inwoo naturally didn't believe what Doyeon said and thought she was crazy. Just then, the supervisor ran over. Doyeon hurriedly stopped Inwoo, who wanted to report it, saying that she could see the deceased's soul by touching the corpse. Before they could say anything, the supervisor informed Doyeon that the deceased's husband had disappeared. Doyeon ran back to the dressing room like crazy. However, her ability seemed to have disappeared. No matter how she touched it, she could not see the pregnant woman's soul. At this time, another colleague told her that because the family of the deceased suddenly disappeared, the burial had to be delayed. Now they had to push the body back into the morgue immediately. The camera panned. The boss, who had been on duty until late at night, received a notification from his superior. According to the surveillance camera, the family had already left the funeral home. They could go home today. By the time Doyeon changed her clothes, the family had been missing for 10 hours. When she returned to her rented place, it was already bright. Uncle enthusiastically introduces his nephew Inwoo, and the two of them realize that they both live here because of last night's incident. Inwoo is still in the dark. They act as if they are meeting for the first time. Doyeon tries to shake Inwoo's hand. At this moment, Ki-hun, a police officer, happens to come home from work. His chatter relieves the awkwardness between the two. Uncle deliberately leaves with the policeman to create a chance for Inwoo, who has been single for a long time, to be alone with a beautiful woman. As soon as they left, Inwoo stopped Do-yeon and told her to move out of the house. The reason was simple: she didn't like her, and she really hated her. Unexpectedly, Do-yeon agreed. Do-yeon, who had been evicted, went to her uncle's house to complain. However, she was already familiar with her uncle's persuasive speech. Do-yeon's biggest concern now was where the deceased's husband had gone. Why did he mention the child's leg? So she went to the hospital where the pregnant woman had given birth. Since the nurse was Do-yeon's best friend, this time she came to ask her for help in checking the pregnant woman's medical records. Doyeon successfully obtained the pregnant woman's medical records and then ran away. She followed the information to locate the pregnant woman's home. However, the place had already been cordoned off by the police. At the same time, she was spotted by two plainclothes officers on stakeout. She was just about to be seen by patrolman Ki-hun, as there had been a homicide in the community. The police had stepped up patrols in the area. Ki-hun guessed that Doyeon had deliberately come here out of concern for her client. But given the current situation, the area is relatively dangerous. Ki-hun patiently persuaded her to trust the police and just waited home for the news report. He also said that as long as you are pious enough, your wish will definitely come true and your missing husband will definitely come back. The camera pans to Doyeon, who was brushing up on the news at a food stall. Over and over in her ears, she can't help but recall what the pregnant woman said to her. Her husband will definitely follow her and the words about the baby's feet. She also remembers the scene when Inwoo suddenly appeared a helpless sigh. Just then, Inwoo came to the food stall to buy a late-night snack. Seeing that Doyeon was also there, he turned around and left. Not sure if it was the alcohol or her worries about the missing man's safety, she told Inwoo, "Whether you think I'm crazy or tell your boss, I don't care. My missing husband is the priority." Doyeon also said that she really could see spirits. "If you hadn't barged in, I would have heard the pregnant woman's words to the end." Inwoo was completely confused. "What does this have to do with me? Why are you blaming me?" However, Doyeon thought it was a matter of life and death, but missed the words of the pregnant woman. The reason for this is because Inwoo himself is not the strange person who appears in his life. On the contrary, Inwoo is. The two's conversation ended on bad terms. That night, Doyeon moved to her best friend Hyami's table tennis club to sleep on the sofa. However, Hyami told her that the place would be renovated tomorrow. So how would she sleep then? After a while, her father was worried about Doyeon's safety and called her to ask if she had closed the doors and windows properly. The father and daughter both worried about each other but hid their difficult situation, only telling each other the best. Meanwhile, Inwoo was on the rooftop watching the news. He recalled what Doyeon had said to him. Had he really done something wrong? The next day, the three girlfriends made plans to go shopping together. Doyeon saw on the news that the body of a man in his 20s had been recovered from the river. However, after the police confirmed that this person was not her missing husband, Inwoo became restless when he heard the news, and, combined with what Doyeon said last night, began to worry about the safety of his missing husband. So he took the initiative to call Ki-hun to inquire about the news. Ki-hun told him that the golden time for finding people was about to pass, and the hope was becoming smaller and smaller. At the same time, the superior put pressure on Doyeon's boss. If the husband of the deceased could not be found, the funeral would have to be carried out according to the law without family members. However, Doyeon firmly believed that he could find him, because today was the birthday of the unborn child. Meanwhile, Inwoo was driving and listening to the radio. The host is reading a post from the deceased wife. Inwoo saw her name at the funeral. It turns out that the couple were both abandoned babies picked up under the bridge. This place is a terrible place for them. Not only is it the place of abandonment, but they can also see the love they will never get. Mom and dad are something they will never be able to reach in their lives and have never had. Fortunately, many years later, she and her husband formed their own family and became pregnant with their baby. Someone will call them mom and dad. This is a name that the couple has never been called. The day they saw the message was the day the baby was born. Hearing this, Inwoo was shocked. The name of the unborn child's milk name was exactly the same as what Doyeon said. Could it be that everything Doyeon said was true? The host was also curious about the child's milk name and happened to be explained in the article. Hearing this, Inwoo was even more convinced that Doyeon could really see the words of the soul. He was very annoyed to interrupt their conversation. At this time, The host was still reading the letter the pregnant woman wrote to her husband. The letter mentioned that the couple would meet again on a bridge. Let them die on the bridge in the future. Inwo thought that the missing husband might be on the bridge, but he had never heard of the bridge mentioned in the letter. Just as she was trying to think, a disturbing phone call came in. Looking at the caller ID number, Inwo seemed to have figured out where the bridge was. It turned out that the day of the incident, the pregnant woman was writing this letter to the radio station. At the same time, a pair of trembling hands held on to the railing, and then the feet stepped on it as well. At this critical moment, Inwo embraced him from behind. However, her husband was determined not to live alone in the world. He begged Inwo to let go of him. However, Inwo said that his wife had left him a letter, but her husband's emotions had long since broken down. He screamed hoarsely, missing his wife. The wide river's surface echoed with one sound after another. In the letter, his wife said she was very grateful to her husband and hoped to marry and have children with him in the next life. Unaware of this, Doyeon prayed silently, waiting for a miracle to happen. In fact, when she first met the pregnant woman's spirit, she told Doyeon that she had already written a letter to her husband and sent it to the radio station. She hoped that the host would read it out so that her husband could hear it. That night, Doyeon stayed at the table tennis hall. She accidentally discovered on a social media platform that someone had met a well-known radio host in a cafe for 3 consecutive days. So she asked her girlfriends to go shopping the next day on the pretext of wanting to drink milk tea. In fact, Doyeon was just taking a chance to see if she could meet the radio host, but her wish was granted. He really came. Doyeon quickly approached him and explained why she was there, hoping that he would tell a story on the show. When the host asked who had written the story, Doyeon said it was a special friend. The radio program was coming to an end. The host wished the pregnant woman a smooth delivery, and that her child would also come to this world safely. On the other side, the husband was finally taken down from the railing by Inwoo. He knelt on the bridge for a long time and refused to leave. The husband brought the juice to his wife's side and tidied her messy hair. He had so many things on his mind, but he couldn't say a word. They should meet again, right? At that moment, the number plate changed from 13 to 12. That night, Inwoo saw the child who had been pestering Doyeon. It seemed like they knew each other. Juno came this time to ask Inwoo something. Inwoo slowly walked up to him and asked, "Why did you try to kill me?" A few months ago, Doyeon encountered her first victim. Even Taejun, an experienced supervisor, considered him the most difficult type to handle. But when Doyeon's hands touched the corpse, suddenly the daytime turned into nighttime. The entire morgue also turned into a dressing room. Just as she was surprised by all this, the dead boy suddenly sat up. The boy also didn't know where he was. Suddenly, he remembered his ring and hurriedly went to open the door. However, he couldn't open any of the doors. Doyeon was so scared that she tried to escape on all fours. The little boy saw that he couldn't open the door, so he asked Doyeon for help. He claimed that the ring, which was very important to him, had been lost near Fingxiu Market. Doyeon, who was terrified, pushed the little boy aside and fled through the door. That was how the child was trapped in the morgue. Since then, Doyeon has always been able to hear the little boy's voice. She locked herself in her room and stayed there from day to night. She suddenly remembered what the little boy had said. The market was only 2 kilometers away, so in the middle of the night, Doyeon ran frantically towards that place. Soon she arrived at a small shop called Fingxiu Market. However, it was already closed. Doyeon then set her sights on the garbage bags on the ground, hoping to try her luck. Maybe the ring was in there, but after rummaging for a long time, she didn't find it. Doyeon felt that she could see ghosts and spirits. It didn't make sense. However, she didn't walk far before she found a jewelry box in the drain. She slowly walked over and squatted there, hesitant to pick it up. Finally, Doyeon mustered up the courage to open it. Sure enough, it was a ring. At this moment, she didn't know whether to be happy or scared. She was happy that she had found the little boy's belongings. She was scared that she could really see ghosts and spirits. That meant this was real. Just then, Doyeon saw the road on the wall. She remembered her boss telling her that the little boy's home was at 79 Gangsan. Look carefully here. The place where Doyeon found the ring is the 3-way intersection. She followed the sign to find the boy's home address. The neighbor lady across the street noticed Doyeon. She quickly explained that she was looking for someone to return something to its owner. However, the lady said that the family moved a few days ago. As for where they moved to, she had no idea. The lady looked at Doyeon's strange outfit and still dialed the boy's parents' phone. However, the other end indicated that the line was disconnected. The aunt said she couldn't get in touch with the other party and left. Doyeon placed the jewelry box in her new rented room and went to talk to her uncle. "I'm sorry I couldn't fulfill the boy's request." In fact, Doyeon searched everywhere for the boy's friends after that to find out where his new home was. She even stood guard in front of the school and contacted the community and moving companies, but still couldn't find a clue. Her uncle comforted Doyeon, saying that as long as she tried her best, she could do nothing more. Meanwhile, Inwoo was also caught up in his memories at the food stall. A few months ago, he was a doctor who failed to save the life of a 10-year-old boy. Inwoo also remembered what Doyeon had done in the past few days. Coincidentally, at this time, he met Doyeon, who was going home. Inwoo hurriedly went up to stop her and asked her some puzzling questions. However, Do-yeon mistakenly thought that In-woo was going to report this matter to the funeral home. She frankly said that she would resign voluntarily and asked him to leave her alone. In the morning, Do-yeon woke up from bed and realized that she had said she would resign because she had drunk too much last night. However, before she could feel remorseful, she heard the squeaking of a mouse from the ceiling. This scared Do-yeon so much that she ran out of the room without changing her clothes. The camera panned to Do-yeon, who wanted to mention her resignation to Tae-jun. Before she could say anything, Tae-jun received a phone call and had to go to work. On the other side, the news of Do-yeon moving out of the rental house had spread. The one who is most saddened is the policeman Ki-hun. He just can't figure out why his sweetheart, who has only moved in for a day, has moved away without saying a word. Ki-hun decides that he must invite Do-yeon back before the room is rented out. In-woo, on the other hand, thinks that he has misunderstood Do-yeon and wants to apologize by phone. But the phone is hung up on him. It turns out that Do-yeon is receiving condolences. His wife's mother has passed away. Since he is too sad, his wife has decided to take on this responsibility. If there is anything, she can discuss it with her. Meanwhile, In-woo happened to meet Do-yeon's father while running errands. In-woo learned Do-yeon's new address from Do-yeon's father. In-woo was very happy to hear the news. Do-yeon's serious work attitude was affirmed by the employer's wife. The employer saw that Do-yeon and Tae-jun had not eaten and invited them to dinner. This was the first time they had been invited. Usually, people only find out the identity of the funeral director at the funeral. It was not until late at night that Do-yeon once again wanted to confess to Tae-jun. But just then, the employer's wife stopped her and handed her a pair of wrist guards, saying that she was really grateful that Do-yeon had helped her hold the baby that day, and that she would also like to trouble her to take care of her mother-in-law, who would pass away tomorrow. However, as soon as Do-yeon left the house, she saw In-woo talking to Tae-jun about something. In-woo said that Do-yeon might be in trouble, but that it was all her own fault. However, Tae-jun didn't understand, but he felt that if he had done something wrong, he should apologize to Do-yeon. In the meantime, Do-yeon, who didn't know the situation, took off her work pin and put it on Tae-jun's desk along with her resignation letter. She thought that In-woo had told Tae-jun about her desecrating the corpse, so she planned to resign first. That night, Ki-hun called Do-yeon while on patrol and begged her to move back in. Unexpectedly, Do-yeon was being followed by a stranger at this time. She quickly told Ki-hun her location on the phone. Just as she turned the corner, In-woo appeared. It turned out that In-woo had come according to the address that Do-yeon's father had given, and what Ki-hun saw was a group of thugs. In-woo came this time to ask Do-yeon to move back. The two of them sat at the bus stop, and In-woo kept saying apologetic words. Just then, Do-yeon received a text message from her supervisor asking her to go to work early tomorrow. She then realized that In-woo wasn't there to complain. Just as the bus pulled into the station, the two of them got on the bus and rode back. As soon as they got on the bus, there was a sudden stop, and Do-yeon threw herself into In-woo's arms. From this point on, the atmosphere became a little awkward. In-woo kept trying to find a topic to ease the tension. On the other side, Tae-jun looked at Do-yeon's resignation letter and gave a fatherly smile. He thought that Do-yeon was overthinking things and that he would never agree to her resignation. However, a phone call made Tae-jun's expression instantly become solemn, but he seemed to be deliberately avoiding that person. And Tae-jun, who had just stepped out the door, was stopped by a woman with a bruised face holding a child. She came this time to borrow 300,000 won to pay for her child's medical treatment. On the other side, Do-yeon only remembered after she returned that In-woo had already apologized last night, and according to Do-yeon, she saved the husband of the pregnant woman. In-woo was convinced that she could see ghosts. He also asked about a young boy around 10 years old. However, Do-yeon had drunk too much and could not remember anything about it. Back in her room, Do-yeon watched the evening news. In-woo fulfilled the last wish of the pregnant woman, to hug her husband. Early the next morning, Do-yeon got up early and bought a large bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums. She remembered that the employer's wife had said that her deceased mother-in-law liked these flowers the most. As Do-yeon walked on the overpass, the woman on the opposite side only glanced at the beggar and diagnosed that the person had suffered an acute stroke. Do-yeon quickly went up to help and called for an ambulance, which saved the beggar's life. It turned out that this woman was a doctor. I guess she is somehow related to In-woo. On their way to work, In-woo and Do-yeon met again. Their relationship seemed to have eased up a lot. Meanwhile, Tae-jun took the woman to check the child into the hospital. Seeing the woman's pitiful appearance, Tae-jun couldn't bear to do so and gave the woman a credit card to let her child be treated. I personally suspect that this woman is Tae-jun's girlfriend whom he fell in love with but ultimately did not marry, because she disliked Tae-jun's occupation. The woman married someone else. Judging from Tae-jun's appearance, it is likely that he has not let go of that relationship. The camera panned to the mother-in-law, who thanked Do-yeon. She also praised her daughter-in-law for being very caring and treating her like her own daughter. Thanks to her, she was able to receive such beautiful flowers. At the same time, the old lady missed her mother very much and could finally go to her now. She wondered if her mother would still recognize her as her daughter with all the white hair and wrinkles on her face. After the funeral, The daughter-in-law kept praising Doyeon's occupation as meaningful and thanked her very much. She even shed tears when she got emotional. However, when Doyeon gave her a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums that were left over, her expression became disgusted. The camera panned to Doyeon and the employer's child bumping into each other. When the daughter-in-law saw this, she quickly pulled up her son and quickly left with an excuse. While wiping her son's hands, she taught him not to touch Doyeon's hands, because the hands of people who often come into contact with corpses are very dirty. When the ignorant child asked if the dead were very dirty, she answered decisively, yes. Coincidentally, this was heard by Inwoo, who was delivering takeaway. The daughter-in-law repeatedly told the child not to touch Doyeon's hands. She also threw the bouquet into the trash can. Inwoo delivered the takeaway to his daughter-in-law and placed the flowers on top. The child said that the flowers were dirty, but his mother covered her mouth. However, the child ran to his father and asked, "Grandma is dead, so she is dirty, isn't she?" The mourners immediately started talking. The daughter-in-law hurriedly came forward to explain, and Doyeon, who was standing nearby, heard everything clearly. Inwoo took Doyeon's hand and walked out. However, Doyeon was sitting alone on the steps. From the introduction of the service to the invitation to dinner and the flowers just now, it turned out that the daughter-in-law had always looked down on her. I have to say that this daughter-in-law is really a person with two faces. Until the end of the day, Inwoo was still waiting outside for Doyeon to decide to take her home. I don't know if it's because of her occupation or because she's embarrassed. Doyeon always held onto Inwoo's clothes. However, Inwoo grabbed her hand and hugged her. There was no word along the way. Doyeon tightened her grip on Inwoo's hand. They arrived at the rental apartment building. Inwoo praised her for being so pretty and handsome. Doyeon's hand unconsciously clenched. It turned out that there was still warmth in the world. Inwoo proposed to take her out to dinner. Deep down, he couldn't understand why Doyeon chose to sit silently alone when she was wronged, instead of scolding her face to face. But would her hand change if she scolded back? Of course not. But those unloved hands allowed the driver to meet his long-lost son, allowed the wife who had lost her husband to find the inheritance and save her husband who wanted to commit suicide. This is the meaning of the funeral director's work. And because of this, Doyeon always hides her thoughts in her heart, because she has no one to confide in. Inwoo thinks she must be very aggrieved. The camera pans to the two of them, drunk and staggering home. Their relationship seems to have become closer. However, when they arrived at the door, Doyeon had already passed out. Inwoo carried her all the way home, and he was exhausted. Combined with the effects of alcohol, the two of them just fell asleep and didn't say a word all night. Early the next morning, Doyeon vaguely sensed that something was wrong. Before Inwoo could figure out the situation, Doyeon asked him if he had done it. Just as Inwoo was about to leave, there was a knock on the door from Ki-hun. He heard Doyeon scream, so he came to see if there had been an accident. Doyeon finally managed to get rid of him. Inwoo then received another call from his uncle. It looked like he wasn't going to be able to leave the house today. However, Doyeon was getting ready for work by taking a shower, so there was the sound of Doyeon taking a shower. Outside, his uncle grumbled about him being lazy. After a while, Doyeon came out and found that Inwoo had disappeared. There was a note in the living room encouraging her not to give up. At the funeral, Doyeon's daughter-in-law told her not to misunderstand, saying that it was all the kids talking nonsense. She really appreciated everything she had done. She also said that they would meet again if they had the chance. Doyeon, however, said, "Let's not meet again in the future." Meanwhile, Inwoo received a reply from Doyeon, who, no matter how much his uncle scolded him, was smiling brighter than the sun. On the other side, Taejun looked thoughtfully at the bill sent to his phone and walked out of the office. At the same time, his uncle came to visit Doyeon. However, Doyeon happened to receive a call from her father. Father is going to visit Doyeon at the place where she is studying. This made her panic and she quickly called for help. Inwoo brought his clothes and school bag and arrived at the destination. However, when Doyeon arrived, father was already waiting at the entrance of the study room. Coincidentally, Inwoo also arrived at this time. The two of them hurriedly ran to the door of the women's bathroom. After Doyeon changed her clothes, the three of them met face to face. Inwoo lied that he was a classmate of Doyeon's, so that's why he was here. Then why did Dad and Inwoo seem so familiar? Inwoo said that he would never forget someone he had met once. I thought the awkwardness had been resolved like that. But then Doyeon's phone rang. The caller ID was his boss Taejun's. Inwoo quickly explained that it was probably a scam and showed Dad his ID. Before he could finish speaking, Dad's phone also rang. The caller ID was Manager Lee's. Inwoo quickly took over the conversation, saying that it was a telemarketing call and that he had received one before. In short, the meal was full of danger. Doyeon's father was exceptionally satisfied with Inwoo's performance today. That night, they boarded the bus back to the city. Inwoo curiously asked Doyeon why he chose the profession of funeral director. Doyeon confessed that nowadays, there are countless college graduates in society. However, He doesn't even have a driver's license. There are no requirements for academic qualifications for funeral directors, and it is a full-time job without retirement. I am very satisfied. Doyeon asked him why he chose to be an errand boy. It's easy to reminisce and miss someone on a rainy day. Whenever this happens, Doyeon will think back to when she was a child and it was time to go home from school, while all the other kids were picked up by their mothers. Her father was working hard on the assembly line to make a living. Doyeon would often pray to her mother in heaven, hoping that the rain would stop soon. Sometimes it really worked and the rain would stop after a while. Of course, sometimes prayers don't work, but her best friend Jisoo's grandmother always gave Doyeon an umbrella and wiped the rain off her forehead. Then the three of them went home together. Now her grandmother has Alzheimer's disease. Her best friend found out somewhere that doing needlework is good for the disease, but now her grandmother always says the wrong things. She just thinks the little girl in front of her is so pretty, almost like her granddaughter. There's a sense of déjà vu. It seems that real needlework really doesn't help Alzheimer's disease at all. So the two of them snuggled together. On the other side, Inwoo bought an umbrella. Today, he will take care of Doyeon instead of her grandmother. The policeman, Ki-hun, also doesn't seem to like rainy days. Inwoo looks out the window as if he is also troubled by something. Early the next morning, Doyeon ran outside while crying. Inwoo stopped him and asked him a question. And that's when he learned that his best friend's grandmother had passed away last night. All the way there, Doyeon kept crying. When they arrived at the funeral home, Doyeon ran in first. Just then, the kind female doctor saw Inwoo. It turned out that a few months ago on a rainy night, Inwoo broke up with her because of something. On the other side, Doyeon looked at his grandmother and lost in thought. The old man's son didn't expect that in the end it would be Doyeon who would see his mother off. Taejun comforted Doyeon and asked her to go and keep Jisoo company. However, the last thing Jisoo regretted was asking her grandmother if she remembered her. However, for someone suffering from dementia, yesterday is always a blank. What can be remembered is today. Jisoo just wanted to make sure that her grandmother had not forgotten her as a granddaughter. However, every time, her grandmother would try very hard to recall who the girl in front of her was. Jisoo asked again and again until she was finally disappointed. But is it so important to remember? Grandma even forgot her beloved son, so Jisoo regretted why she was so persistent. Doyeon asked her if there was anything she wanted to do for her grandma. Jisoo said yesterday grandma asked me to cut her nails. Just then the man at the table next to them yelled out there was no more wine, and she flirted with the waiter in public, but Jisoo didn't know who this person was. However, during the day, Doyeon was trimming Jisoo's grandmother's nails, pleading with her not to leave. However, the old woman felt that she was happy to see Doyeon on her way out and have her blessing. She also sincerely thanked her for taking care of her for so long. And Jisoo, it must be very difficult for her to take care of a grandmother with dementia. If she had known this, the grandmother said she would have left sooner. That way, her children would not have had to work so hard, but she had a selfish wish to see her granddaughter get married before she died. Grandma tells Doyeon that she has prepared a wedding gift for Jisoo, but she hasn't been able to tell her in person. She hopes that her granddaughter can receive it when she gets married. If she could just be given a little more time, she could make another gift for Doyeon. In fact, Doyeon is very grateful that her grandmother doesn't feel sorry for her because she doesn't have a mother. Grandma promises Doyeon that when she meets her mother, she will definitely convey that her daughter has grown up to be beautiful and very talented. She also told Doyeon and Jisoo to find their other halves as soon as possible. Love is a very wonderful emotion. When people feel pain or fatigue, memories of love can support them through their lives. However, Doyeon had already cried until she could not cry anymore. After the funeral, she and Jisoo cried together. When they were sorting the dinner plates that night, the man kept complaining that there was no more alcohol. Taejun coaxed and lied to get the man outside. However, this person still wanted to fight, but Taejun did not indulge him, and this scene happened to be seen by Jisoo and her father. At the funeral the next day, Doyeon told Jisoo that her grandmother had left her a gift. It was a quilt that her grandmother had sewn with her own rough hands. Looking at the neat embroidery on it and the stitches that perfectly matched the corners of the quilt, I finally understood the true meaning of the expression seeing something reminds you of someone. The next day, Doyeon and Inwoo went to the cinema as they had promised Ki-hun. However, Ki-hun called to say that he had a case that required his attention, and his uncle also texted to say that he couldn't make it, and the good team building became a date for the two of them. Just as they were watching the movie, their hands reached for the popcorn bucket at the same time. In fact, Ki-hun the policeman did not handle the case and kept hiding at home without going out. He didn't know why he didn't like the rain. On the other side, after watching the movie, the two of them stood at the entrance of the building. Doyeon seemed to not hate the rain so much after getting to know Inwoo. They ran home in the rain. The two of them stood downstairs to avoid the rain. Doyeon told Inwoo that she didn't feel lonely working as a mortician. She didn't feel lonely until someone told her not to hold back. Just then, the kind female doctor called out to Inwoo. Doyeon remembered that this person was the female doctor on the bridge that day. The two of them walked straight into the store. leaving Doyeon alone outside. When Doyeon returned home, she even found her favorite stuffed animal annoying. On the other side, the female doctor asked Inwo how he was doing and if he had thought about himself. It turned out that they were also an enviable couple when they were in the hospital. But because of something, Inwo gave up his job and broke up with the female doctor. After so long, it seems that he still hasn't let go of that matter. Early the next morning, Uncle found Inwo, who was running a fever, in the refrigerator. While he was buying medicine, he met a miner in school uniform buying cigarettes. When Inwo returned, Doyeon's uncle happened to come to pray for him. After finishing his prayers, the uncle left, accidentally knocking over a glass of water and splashing Doyeon. Inwo quickly took out a tissue to wipe her off. The priest uncle saw through Inwo's thoughts, but he didn't expose him. With the uncle's enthusiastic invitation and the uncle's fearful shouts, the two of them left. Inwo decided to invite Doyeon to lunch, but before that, he wants Doyeon to change the door code. At this time, Doyeon still asks the question in his heart, is that female doctor your first love? Sure enough, every man has an unforgettable first love. At this time, Inwo received a text message from Doyeon's father asking him to meet, so he and Doyeon once again confirmed that they would have lunch together at noon. However, he didn't see that Doyeon seemed to be a little bit bothered by her first love. It turns out that Doyeon's father asked Inwo to meet him partly to thank him for his help the other day, and partly to ask him to look after his daughter, and to persuade Doyeon to give up her job as a mortician. Meanwhile, Doyeon is getting ready for their lunch date, but when she thinks about Inwo's first love, she wipes the lipstick off her lips. It turns out that the female doctor is also a pitiful person. She grew up in a single-parent family. Her mother was a doctor, but her stepfather's number added up to more than a football team. Her mother asked her to come today to introduce her daughter to a matchmaker, but the people she introduced her to before never valued character, only family background. Her mother guessed that her daughter had not yet forgotten Inwo and advised her to find a better one sooner. However, what her mother did not know was that Inwo had always been by her daughter's side when she was most confused and most in need of love. Inwo had once been everything to the female doctor. She immediately called Inwo, but Inwo had just left Doyeon's father's shop and didn't pick up, and then he received an order for lunch. On the other side, Doyeon was buying medicine for Inwo and received a call from him saying that there was an emergency and he couldn't make the appointment. Just as Doyeon was walking home alone, she saw Inwo walk into a noodle shop and his girlfriend was waiting for him. This is how the misunderstanding between the two arose. It turned out that the ex-girlfriend had asked Inwo to accompany her to dinner because she wanted to tell her that her mother had found a new love, and she couldn't think of anyone else to talk to except Inwo. The ex-girlfriend asked Inwo if he could comfort her, but Inwo didn't like her behavior. On the way back, Doyeon received a text message from Kihan asking her to have lunch together. Meanwhile, Taejun also received a text message from the woman with the bruises all over her face. Because her child had been diagnosed with heart disease, the only way to save her child's life was to undergo a transplant. However, it was difficult to find a newborn donor. Believing in superstition, the woman wanted to borrow another 50 million won to try again. However, when Taejun called her, there was no answer. Just as he turned around, he met Jisoo. In fact, Jisoo had already been deeply attracted to Taejun. This time, she was worried that he had not eaten on time and specially brought a big pot of beef soup. Meanwhile, Kihan and Doyeon saw the student buying cigarettes again at the convenience store. In the country, underage people who buy cigarettes are sent to a reformatory. Coincidentally, Inwoo received a commission to buy cigarettes. Kihan decided to go and see what was going on. Doyeon, who was still angry, was preparing to leave first. At this time, Kihan asked Inwoo to give Doyeon a ride and stay behind to deal with the underage person. On the way to work, Inwo said he couldn't eat lunch. However, Doyeon thinks he is lying and gets off the bus halfway. When Doyeon goes to work in the afternoon, he is distracted, and the grandson of the deceased disappears. That person is the miner. After Kihan learned the news, he personally took him to the funeral home, but the kid just turned his head and walked away. It turns out that Kihan learned from the miner's uncle that his parents had died a long time ago. On the other hand, Doyeon received a request from his grandmother. She wants to replace the portrait, and a small part of the reason was because the photo wasn't good looking, but the uncle firmly refused. Just then, the miner also pleaded with the uncle to replace the portrait. However, Grandma's house is far away in the countryside. Taejun was worried that Doyeon would not be safe going alone, so he asked Inwoo's uncle to come and send her. Coincidentally, the female doctor saw Doyeon get into Inwoo's car. The misunderstanding was reversed. So why did Inwoo come to Doyeon? Inwo said that his uncle had night blindness, so he came himself. On the way, Inwo tried to find topics to chat with Doyeon to ease the awkwardness. However, Doyeon told him about seeing him having lunch with his ex-girlfriend during the day. Inwo explained that it was his job and that he hadn't eaten a bite, assuring her that he wasn't lying. The only thing he lied about was that his uncle had night blindness. As soon as he heard that Taejun had placed the order, he rushed over. In other words, Inwo cares about Doyeon's safety. After the two arrived at their destination, Inwo kept looking around. He finally found the pack of cigarettes in a drawer. It turned out that Minju knew that his grandmother's time was running out. He bought the cigarettes for his grandmother to smoke. When he was young, he once said that he disliked the smell of cigarettes on his grandmother. And since then, she had never smoked again. Minju felt very sorry for his grandmother. He sat in front of her funeral hall and cried his heart out. As for the photo of her that he wanted to replace, she thought it was the most beautiful photo of her with her grandson. At this time, the counter also changed from 10 to 9. On the way back, Doyeon asked Inwo to drive safely. Inwo, however, claimed that he was a very good driver. Then, after a while, the car stalled. No matter how Inwo accelerated, it was useless. Just as he was about to back up, the car rolled over sideways. Inwo struggled to move back to his seat. The car is definitely not moving now. He wants to unbuckle his seatbelt and figure out what to do. However, the moment he unbuckles, he falls directly onto Doyeon. Doyeon immediately screamed loudly. The camera panned and the two of them successfully escaped. However, due to the location of the accident and the fact that it was already midnight, the rescue team would not be able to arrive until the morning. Seeing Doyeon limping, Inwo felt very guilty inside. After getting the permission of the owner of the house, the two of them decided to spend the night here. After everything was arranged, Doyeon complained that her leg hurt, so Inwo carried her on his back and walked towards her grandmother's house. In fact, Doyeon had long been used to the injury on her foot, because this was the only way she could quit the table tennis team. Inwo told her that the nerves in the vicinity had degenerated, and that old injuries could recur at any time. Doyeon felt like she was her own doctor. It was only at this point that she reacted. Inwo and the female doctor were alumni. In other words, Inwo really is a doctor. But Inwo said he used to be one, but not anymore. Seeing how embarrassed he looked, Doyeon felt that it was okay if he didn't want to talk about it. But Doyeon suspected that Inwo was a mediocre doctor who didn't even know that he had a fever. This made Inwo feel a little embarrassed. The camera panned, and Doyeon gave Inwo, who hadn't eaten anything, a bottle of drink as dinner, and handed him the medicine she bought to take, and made room for Inwo to sleep. On the one hand, Inwo is now sick. On the other hand, he needs to drive tomorrow. On the other side, the ex-girlfriend called her uncle. She learned from the other party that the person who picked up Doyeon was Inwo. At the same time, Doyeon comforted Inwo. He has had his own reasons for quitting table tennis since he was 10 years old. She can understand very well that Inwo doesn't want to mention the doctor. However, Inwo said he would not mention it. If you tell a girl who understands you all your troubles, and then start to rely on her, what should you do? The next morning, Inwo had fixed the car. It seemed that his illness had also gone away. Doyeon's foot injury wasn't a big problem either. The two of them drove back. That night, Jisoo was happy and ecstatic. She told her girlfriends that when someone starts to care about someone, it means they've fallen in love. Doyeon recalled being jealous when she saw her ex-girlfriend. When Inwo was sick, she would get nervous. Sitting behind him on the motorcycle would make her heart race. Does that mean she really likes Inwo? Doyeon gathers her courage and goes to the shop. But here's Inwo's ex-girlfriend say she wants to kill the man. On a rainy night, a young boy holding an umbrella goes to pick up his brother from work. Do you remember the three-way intersection I told you to pay attention to? A sudden car accident changed the destinies of two families. The little boy who was hit was the one who kept pestering Doyeon. He is also Inwo's younger brother. The two brothers are very close. The driver in the car accident was Kihan's policeman, which is why he is so afraid of the rain. Kihan is also the person Inwo's ex-girlfriend said she wanted to kill. Doyeon immediately stood up when he heard this, and the ex-girlfriend realized there was another person. Before she could react, Doyeon awkwardly left. However, the ex-girlfriend also realized that she was the one who had uninvitedly entered. She didn't understand why Inwo had been carrying the pain all this time, which indirectly affected the relationship between the two. Perhaps if Inwo killed the driver, who was still in a coma, he would be able to move on. But everything had already been decided. What had happened could not be changed. After the ex-girlfriend left the shop, she cried very sadly. The next morning, when Doyeon was getting ready to go out for a workout, she ran into Inwo. This time, the two of them met, and it was incredibly awkward. Jisoo is a sensible person. She believes that when a girl has someone she likes, she will give up her favorite food. She will also exercise even harder to become more beautiful. Doyeon heard this and thought of Inwo's ex-girlfriend. Would she really kill for the person she likes? Jisoo wasn't sure if she would do that. At least she would be willing to die for the other person. Of course, it's not that simple. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice for love. On the other side, the uncle took Inwo to the church. Meanwhile, Doyeon asked her uncle if first love was really that good. For a priest, his heart has long been given to God. How could the memories of first love shake his heart? But he was curious about who Doyeon was talking about when she said first love. She had the inquisitive attitude of a child. Doyeon, who had planned to just leave, immediately changed her mind when she heard her uncle say that there was lunch at the church today. However, her uncle and Inwo were also having lunch together. After lunch, the group happened to bump into the children of the church members. At the same time, a parent gave them ice cream to eat. Among them was a very shy Joseph. Looking at him, Doyeon remembered the same situation when she was a child on the table tennis team. She envied her little friend for having a mother's love. At that time, the only one by her side was Jisoo, and Inwoo recalled his younger brother. Before the car accident, he promised to watch the stars in the sky with him at night, but now it had become a promise that could not be kept. That day, Taejun found his ex-girlfriend. However, because of the child's illness, she had spent all the money and credit cards that Taejun had given her. At that moment, Taejun thought that he should let the child's father handle it. But what was infuriating was that this person had long known but showed no concern. Taejun angrily demanded the number of the child's father. And just then, the ex-girlfriend's father found the place. He blamed his daughter for meeting with a dirty undertaker when the child was sick. He even thought that Taejun had ulterior motives towards his daughter. It was all because of his bad luck that his grandson got sick. Jisoo, who had left, was also shocked, but her biggest concern was whether Taejun was married or not, and she let out a sigh of relief when she learned from Doyeon that he wasn't. On the other side, Doyeon, who had left the church, received a job offer from Taejun, and on her way back, she happened to meet Inwoo's ex-girlfriend. The two got to know each other better and realized that they were so close after learning about their jobs. Mar also deliberately revealed that she and Inwoo had a relationship. This sentence made Doyeon feel uneasy all day. That night, Inwoo ran into Doyeon's father while at work, and also saw Joseph in the park. It turned out that his father had just passed away not long ago. His mother worked day and night to make ends meet, and life was still very difficult. For a moment, Inwoo thought of Joseph as his younger brother who had passed away. The next day, while reading the students' diaries, his uncle noticed Joseph's wish. He asked the child if there was anything he wanted to do that he could help him achieve. So his uncle received a call from his uncle asking him to arrange a camping trip, but when he was ready, he received a text message from Inwoo's ex-girlfriend asking to meet immediately. He could only leave this matter to Inwoo to complete. When the uncle learned that the uncle could not come, he immediately contacted Doyeon. In fact, he wanted to create space for the two to get along. On the way, Inwoo noticed that Joseph wanted to go to the bathroom but was embarrassed to ask, and when they arrived near the campsite, Doyeon treated him like a child and would not let him help. In fact, children at this age don't like to be treated like babies. When they set up camp, Inwoo's clumsiness made it hard to believe that he was the one doing all the running around. On the contrary, Doyeon did everything methodically. The woman next door mistook them for a couple. The child was their nephew. Joseph suddenly called out, "Brother!" This brother cry reached Inwoo's heart. He hadn't heard that name in a long time. While Joseph played by himself, Doyeon asked Inwoo how things were with his ex-girlfriend. At that moment, the woman next door asked Doyeon to go over and help. Inwoo asked Joseph if there was anything he wanted to do, but the child didn't say much. So Inwoo took him to the tent and threw his teeth on it. Joseph's teeth will grow quickly and healthily. This move could not help but make the child hold his two fingers. However, Inwoo was stunned, because his younger brother also grabbed his hand in the same way when he begged him. That special way of holding hands made Inwoo's eyes red. The camera pans and the three of them arrive at a bench. They came to look at the stars in the sky, because this was Joseph's wish. At home and at the amusement park, the view was not clear. He heard that you can only see the stars clearly in a very dark place, that's why he came to camp. Then why does he want to see the stars so badly? Because Joseph's mother told him that his deceased father turned into a star and will always be watching the mother and son from the sky. His mother also said that whenever she misses her father, she looks up at the stars in the sky. But Joseph doesn't know which star is his father. He stood there and cried loudly. Doyeon stood up, hugged Joseph, pointed to the stars in the sky, and told him that his mother had also become a star, and was definitely with Joseph's missing father, and might even be watching their children. I don't know if young Joseph understood. After putting the children to bed, Inwoo and Doyeon decided to go for a walk. They felt that not only did Joseph firmly believe that the dead would become stars, but also many families of the deceased. In fact, the ones who suffer the most are the families. No matter what they have experienced, they must go on living. Inwoo suddenly stops in his tracks and confesses to Doyeon that he has a younger brother who once promised to go see the stars with him. That day, he asked his brother to bring the ring to Fengshou Market. However, when Inwoo received another call, he received the news that his brother had an accident. When Inwoo arrived, the doctors had already announced his brother's death. He looked at his brother lying on the hospital bed, trying hard again and again, but the cold machine showed zeros. So Inwoo lives with deep self-blame. He thinks he killed his brother. Doyeon doesn't know how to help Inwoo. Inwoo can only hug him tightly. That's why Inwoo's brother cares so much about the ring. Doyeon also confesses her secret to Inwoo at this time. When she first became a mortician, she met a young boy. He seemed to care more about other people than himself. Perhaps Inwoo's brother. like the young boy, should not hate his brother. Inwo's heart seems to have been released. He thanked Doyeon for being there for him. The next morning, Inwo made breakfast for Doyeon to wake up. He deliberately said that everyone who came here to play stayed for 2 nights. Doyeon seemed to agree with him, so the two of them asked Joseph for his opinion. They also mentioned all the delicious food and fun things they had done. Joseph, however, said he wanted to go home to his mother, although Inwo was a little disappointed that he couldn't spend another day with Doyeon. But the two tentative hearts slowly drew closer. The group returned to the church. Uncle hadn't seen Joseph smile so happily for a long time. After learning that his mother was sleeping without fear, Joseph said, "If I had known you weren't afraid, I wouldn't have come back. My sister and brother wanted to stay an extra night before coming back." The two couldn't help but feel awkward, but Uncle was smiling particularly happily. That night, Doyeon and Inwo were about to confess their feelings in the car. However, at the critical moment, Inwo's uncle appeared. When he got home, Inwo showered Doyeon with praise. On the other side, Doyeon seemed to be waiting for Inwo to message her. Whenever her phone rang, she immediately checked it. But it was just her uncle sending her a caring text. Doyeon was about to complain when she received a goodnight message from Inwo. "Look how happy she is." Downstairs, Kihan happened to be home from work. He was very happy to be spending time with people here like family. He is even happier to be living in the same building as Doyeon, and claims that he has already fallen head over heels for her, loving her beauty, her walk, and especially the way she smiles. These feelings Inwoo also has. He is not sure if he has also fallen in love. The next morning Doyeon repeatedly ties her shoelaces, because she wants to create a situation where she and Inwoo will meet by chance. When she hears the door open downstairs, she immediately lies on the door to eavesdrop. However, the person who opened the door was actually her uncle. Meanwhile, Inwoo hurriedly pushed the door open as well. It seems that he and Doyeon had the same idea. Inwoo offered to take Doyeon to work. Along the way, the two of them talked and laughed, and their relationship grew closer. The camera panned to a car that Inwoo encountered while at work. He bowed deeply to his ex-girlfriend's mother. However, he was rejected by the other party. Mar's mother brought her young boyfriend to her daughter's house. Her mother felt bad for Mar and actually missed the guy who abandoned her. The mother and daughter had a big fight. The fight ended with a slap. Mar sat in the car, feeling aggrieved and unwilling. Who could understand her? That night, when Doyeon went back, she ran into Inwoo at the door. Just as they were discussing what to eat for dinner, Mar's car pulled up. The two of them looked at each other in shock. Mar was going to stay here for a few days. Inwoo immediately went up to stop her. Doyeon awkwardly went back upstairs. The person she liked was still in contact with her ex. It seems that no woman can accept it. It turns out that Mar had previously asked her uncle to discuss the temporary residence. Inwoo angrily asked her to stay in a hotel. However, at night, her uncle was a little worried. Inwoo simply gave up his room and was going to sleep at the store. Mar immediately chased after seeing this. She actually came this time to try to reconcile with Inwoo. Then why would Inwoo be so cold to her? When Inwoo's younger brother had a car accident, the director arranged for Mar to rescue the driver. The driver had multiple injuries and his pulse was gone. Mar did everything a doctor could to save him. Outside the door, Inwoo's brother was already pronounced dead. He didn't know why no one could help the intern. Inwoo watched as his brother left him. When Mar came out, she found Inwoo holding his brother's hand and crying his heart out. But Inwoo believes that if he were in that situation, as a doctor, he would have made the same choice as Mar, so he doesn't need to feel guilty or sorry about it. But Mar is willing to wait for Inwoo to come back, no matter how long it takes. However, Inwoo insists that the two of them will never get back together. In fact, his uncle guessed that Inwoo couldn't get over the incident because he was wearing his engagement ring when his brother had the accident that day. His uncle comforts Inwoo, saying that he looked very happy when he returned from camping. After being so lost for so long, Inwoo is finally slowly getting better. However, Inwoo believes that he shouldn't get better, let alone live a carefree life, because he doesn't deserve it. The next day, Mar happened to drop Doyeon off at work. She deliberately started a conversation about Inwoo on the way. At that time, she received a call from the restaurant. It turned out that Mar had booked the restaurant tonight in Inwoo's name. She also confessed that she came this time to reconcile with Inwoo, and they had been dating for 10 years. Doyeon was really shocked when she heard this. At the same time, Inwoo received a text message from Mar asking to meet. Doyeon walked to work with a slight heartache. She happened to see Juse carrying a big watermelon to Taejun. Doyeon advised her best friend Taejun had a first love that he had been dating for 20 years and that his first love had returned. But Jisoo just liked this kind of man with a story and deep feelings. But Doyeon thought she shouldn't interfere. Isn't this the same as Doyeon's current relationship? The deceased girl's name was Jack and she was the 9th person to make a wish. She was supposed to be at the age of beauty but illness took her life. Jack wanted to grow her hair long because she was tired of constantly losing hair and wearing a wig every day. Since getting sick, There were so many things she couldn't do. Injecting the white blood cell growth medicine was very painful, but now it's okay. Finally free from the torment of illness, and having no friends, staying in class during gym class and living like a fool. The most important thing is that her parents finally don't have to worry about medical expenses. Dad quit his job as a firefighter to take care of her and cried every day. Jack hoped that after she died, they could live easily, but she had one thing she regretted. She wanted Doyern to put the letter she hadn't sent in the locker of the person she was writing to. Because of her illness, Jack was often bullied by her classmates. One day, the Prince Charming of her life appeared. From then on, Jack always secretly watched Tom, but she didn't have the courage to give the letter she had written to him, because Jack didn't know if she was worthy of such love. She could only express her feelings of love in her letter. To be honest, I envy this pure and innocent first love. That's why Jack regretted it after she died. She regretted not being able to express her feelings. No matter if Tom likes her or not, she should bravely tell him how she feels. Isn't Doyern experiencing the same emotions as Jack? She met Inwoo in a strange way. Then the two of them had misunderstandings and she wasn't sure if he was protecting her out of pity. Even now, Inwoo still has a place in his heart for his first love. All of this has made Doyern hesitant. If she doesn't bravely express her feelings, how will she know if the other person cares about her? So Doyern gathered her courage and came to find Inwoo, but the other party was not there. Could it be that he went to meet his ex-girlfriend? Doyern, who was disheartened, happened to meet Inwoo when she walked to the front door. She grabbed Inwoo's hand and directly said those three words. However, a heartfelt confession is always let down. Inwoo was just about to pull away from Doyern's hand and frankly admit that he has no feelings for her. The sudden confession made him feel very uncomfortable and he hoped that it would not happen again in the future. After saying this, Inwoo turned around and was about to leave, but Doyern was not willing to give up and called out to Inwoo to confirm once again that he really did not feel anything for her. Inwoo did not turn back and walked straight away. He arrived at an office building. It turned out that his ex-girlfriend's mother had been waiting here for a long time. Although Mar's mother was unreliable, she deeply loved her daughter. This office building was a gift from her to Inwoo as a token of her wish to be with her daughter forever. Inwoo said that he did not want to have anything to do with Mar anymore. If he had known Mar's mother's intentions, Inwoo would not have come to the appointment today. Inwoo sincerely hopes that Mar will leave the store and never contact him again. Hearing this, Mar's mother is furious. She angrily asks Inwoo why he blames Mar for his brother's death. Inwoo then says that he already has someone he likes. Mar can only curse at his back. Mar, who is still unaware of the situation, receives a text message from her mother and quickly calls back. Mom told her everything that happened when she met Inwoo. Mar couldn't accept the truth and sat on the ground, crying in pain. Meanwhile, Doyern, who had been rejected, and her girlfriends drowned their sorrows in alcohol. However, Jisoo was also heartbroken, but she believed in a saying her grandmother had told her: if the person you like also likes you back, that's a miracle. She wondered if this saying had reached Doyern's heart. She thoughtfully drank a lot of alcohol. On the way home, Doyern couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened and what Inwoo had said. She didn't know if it was because she had drunk too much or because her emotions had exploded. But Doyern also crouched on the ground, hugging her head and crying. Coincidentally, Kihan was passing by at this time. He recognized at once that it was the person he liked. Kihan carefully escorted Doyern all the way. While he took care of her, he also cared about why she was drinking so much. Their conversation was heard clearly by Inwoo. The next morning, the two happened to meet. Doyern hoped that Inwoo would not feel embarrassed about last night and took the initiative to apologize to him. After all, it is not easy to reject someone. Uncle saw Inwoo holding a hangover remedy and felt a little strange, and Mar's things were all gone. Inwoo didn't explain much and got dressed to go to work. Doyern came to her uncle's place and said that she had been rejected. She thought that even if she was rejected, she could still smile calmly. Doyern went to confess because she didn't want to leave any regrets. However, after being rejected, she realized that she liked Inwoo even more than she thought. Uncle comforted Doyern, saying that if the feelings are strong, just let it go. You don't have to face it calmly. The most important thing is not to force yourself to go against your heart. After bidding Doyern farewell, an old man approached him. This man was about to get married and wanted to ask the uncle for a favor. He first thanked Inwoo for breaking up with him so smoothly and without any follow-up trouble. The man also said that he had been feeling a bit lonely lately. When it was late at night and he was alone, he occasionally thought of Doyern. Inwoo ignored the nagging ex-boyfriend. On the other hand, Taejun's funeral home was ranked first in the city overall. However, the catering service fell behind. Future hospital funeral home. Taejun was ordered to write a report on the matter. His subordinates suggested sending someone to investigate, but the general manager of that funeral home has 20 years of work experience. You can tell who it is just by looking at his back, so the responsibility fell on Doyern. who had only been working there for a few months. The transportation arrangements were given to Inwoo's shop, but Inwoo didn't want to ask his uncle to replace him for once. He even said he would do anything for him next time. On the way, his uncle could see that Doyeon was very tired. Doyeon explained that he had drunk a lot last night. He then remembered that Inwoo had put hangover medicine in the car before they left. So, the uncle passed on Inwoo's intentions to Doyeon. The uncle believes that the journey of life ends with death, and he deeply respects funeral directors, who are always with death. This time, I came not only to see an outstanding funeral director, but also to experience outstanding food and drink. After the funeral director left, Doyeon first took a photo of the food, and the uncle began to taste it. The two of them worked seamlessly together. Just then, Doyeon received a call from Jisoo. It turned out that Jisoo had interviewed at the hospital where Doyeon worked. In fact, she went there to see Taejun. However, their conversation happened to be heard by the hospital's mortician. Meanwhile, Doyeon's father came to Inwoo's shop. He couldn't rest easy about his hardworking daughter, so he brought a lot of delicious food. Doyeon's father, on the one hand, asked Inwoo to give it to his daughter. On the other hand, he hoped that Inwoo could take care of Doyeon for him. Inwoo insisted on taking Doyeon's father home. Doyeon's father was particularly happy along the way. In the evening, Doyeon and his uncle returned to the shop, but the girl who was going to get married was sitting at the door. It turned out that it was the priest's uncle who introduced her. Doyeon recognized at once that it was her brother who had been successfully sent away not long ago. The girl now had no relatives or friends. This time she came to ask someone from the shop to pretend to be her family at the wedding. Doyeon and her uncle decided to help her out. As soon as she arrived home, she heard a knock at the door. It turned out to be Inwoo, who had been sent by Doyeon's father. After delivering the message, he left without saying anything else. Uncle asked Inwoo to go to the wedding with Doyeon. Inwoo said he didn't want to go. Uncle immediately got angry. "You promised me before that you would do whatever I asked." On the other side, Doyeon's father called his daughter and told her that she could come home anytime if she wanted to. Although paternal love is not as detailed as maternal love, it is more profound. Early the next morning, Kihyun asked Doyeon to go for a run together. He expressed his feelings for her. Doyeon had just experienced a confession and knew the feeling of being rejected. However, she still confessed to Kihyun that she already had someone she liked. Kihyun said it was okay, but then he turned around and burst into tears. He wanted to find out who the bastard was that Doyeon liked, and couldn't care less about his integrity as a policeman. He killed the man and buried him. This joke made the uncle and Inwoo nervous. The lovelorn Kihyun was dejected and couldn't muster the energy. Inwoo advised him to take care of his health because this person often had headaches. At this time, Kihyun received a call from the police station. It turned out that he had been promoted. After being a police officer for 2 years, he has finally become a full-fledged detective. The feeling of having lost and then regained something is beyond words. On his first day at work, the veteran officer let him look at the case file on his own. That day, Doyeon pretended to be the rich bride's best friend to attend an important wedding, but the groom received the news that the best friend's boyfriend would also be attending. Obviously, Doyeon and the bride had not coordinated. Doyeon, who had not yet reacted, froze in place. In fact, all of this was deliberately arranged by his uncle and uncle. They knew that Doyeon and Inwoo liked each other but didn't take the next step, so they came up with this plan. The groom didn't doubt Doyeon and Inwoo's identities. However, Doyeon's ex-boyfriend saw the scene. He was peeping in front of the bride's dressing room. He wondered how these two knew each other. Just then, the groom came over and told him that this was the bride's best friend, who had returned from studying abroad and was attending the wedding with her boyfriend. The ex-boyfriend obviously couldn't let go of Doyeon's beauty. It turns out that the 8th wish granter hoped that Doyeon would listen to her wishes when she met her sister again. It just so happened that last night, under the guidance of her uncle, her sister asked the store to pretend to be a relative who could receive the bouquet. So Doyeon pretended to be her best friend's sister and the wedding proceeded in an orderly manner. Doyeon also received the bouquet. It could have ended perfectly, but the ex-boyfriend wouldn't give up. This person blocked Inwoo in the bathroom and humiliated him. Is there a twin brother? How else could he become the bride's best friend's boyfriend? The groom's family is well off and wants to find a wife who is a good match for them. I have seen fake parents and a fake MC before. Today, I have really opened my eyes. I have actually seen the errand boy pretending to be the bride's best friend's boyfriend. Inwoo quickly bowed to apologize, explaining that he had heard that the bride had a secret. In fact, what the ex-boyfriend cared about was whether Inwoo and Doyeon had been dating. However, Inwoo didn't say a word. The man thought it was very funny. The errand boy broke up with his girlfriend for him, and then the two of them ended up getting back together. He told Inwoo with conviction that Doyeon was just using him, and even brought up the mortician. Inwoo still didn't say a word. However, the man didn't stop, because he regretted it a little. Doyeon was indeed pretty, but her job was not good. He saw Inwoo's clenched fist and threatened that he might accidentally let it slip. This could ruin a wedding. The ex-boyfriend said he wouldn't say anything and patted Inwoo on the shoulder. This completely angered Inwoo. Then Doyeon's ex-boyfriend called the people at the wedding into the bathroom. He yelled that Doyeon was a mortician posing as a rich best friend and that morticians only spread bad luck. The two instantly wrestled with each other. Luckily, their friends pulled them apart. Soon the gossip reached the ears of the groom. On the other side, Ki-hun and his colleagues encountered Inwoo's ex-girlfriend while on a mission. It seemed that Mar was really involved in the car accident from the way Ki-hun looked at her. The bride's mother was embarrassed by the bride's behavior. Doyeon apologized to the bride. At this time, the counter went from 8 to 7. Inwoo also expressed his apologies. However, the groom did not choose to cancel the wedding because of the bride's deception. Instead, he was willing to face it with her. Although the wedding was a mess, he was grateful that Inwoo and Doyeon had become friends with his wife. And finally he hoped that Inwoo would not do anything he would regret. That night Inwoo apologized to Doyeon, who had previously hurt Doyeon in order to make money from Doyeon's ex-boyfriend. Subsequently, Inwoo could not help but taste Doyeon's lips. After Inwoo and Doyeon confirmed their relationship, he thought he should never feel happy or sad again in his life. But after meeting Doyeon, everything changed. He was happy again. On the other side of the screen, his uncle and his aunt couldn't hide their happiness. His uncle was happy that Inwoo could let go of the past and start a new life. His aunt was happy that Doyeon had found someone who looked at her with love in his eyes. On the way home, Inwoo asked Doyeon to go to the movies with him the next night. However, Doyeon had to go on a business trip. There were many elderly people receiving treatment in hospitals in Seoul, but they all wanted to be buried in their hometowns. An old lady passed away in a nursing home. Shortly afterwards, her husband had a heart attack while picking persimmons and also passed away with his wife. What a regrettable thing. The deceased grandfather kept asking his wife to cook for him. He was rude and unreasonable. His wife complained about why he had followed her here. She had cooked for her husband for 80 years and had had enough. She also said that she definitely did not want to be buried together after death. However, her husband was worried that the cemetery was too expensive. At this time, his wife noticed that her husband's clothes were not buttoned properly. She hurried over and scolded him for being unable to button his shirt at his age. In fact, Grandpa knew he wasn't in good health, but because his wife said she wanted to eat persimmons, he took the risk and went up the tree himself to pick them. Some people have passionate love affairs that end without a trace. Some people never say the word love but always care deeply. Grandpa asked Doyeon to place some persimmons in front of their pew, because Grandma really liked them. At that moment, the counter went from 7 to 5. The two people who have been together for a long time holding hands. There is nothing happier than this in a lifetime. Doyeon's business trip was over. Inwoo had already been waiting outside for her. At that moment, Doyeon asked, "If I want to eat persimmons, will you help me pick them?" Inwoo didn't answer her. However, the next day, he didn't reply to Doyeon's message either. When at work, Doyeon found that Inwoo was really picking persimmons. A couple in love has endless things to say. Doyeon and Inwoo giggled while holding their phones. That afternoon, Inwoo's uncle told him that he had to return to the store at 7 p.m. that night. He didn't say why. Doyeon received a call from Jisoo. She had gotten her wish and was working at the hospital next to the funeral home. She happened to run into Taejun. Taejun's ex-girlfriend had gone missing. He called the hospital to check if she had been discharged with a baby. However, they only verified the patient's information externally, but Taejun didn't know the baby's name. Jisoo volunteered to help him find out. That night, Inwoo and Doyeon returned to the shop, and were startled again by their uncles. It turned out that their uncles had specially arranged for their uncles to have dinner together. After dinner, they played Wado again. Uncle Priest kept saying not to cheat, but he blatantly helped Doyeon win the game with a high score. The uncle who lost asked Inwoo to go out and buy some food. Doyeon hurriedly followed him. They thought no one would find out, but in fact it was all under the control of the two old kids. The two of them also lamented that love was progressing so quickly. Doyeon and Inwoo sat at the Sky Cafe on a date, saying that their best friend would be visiting the next day. She wanted to announce their relationship, but Doyeon didn't want Inwoo to show up halfway through. Just as they were leaving the cafe, they happened to be seen by Mar's mother. The next morning, her mother blocked Mar's way in front of the hospital. Mar was kicked out of the shop and has been living in a cheap hotel. She didn't want to pay attention to her unreliable mother, but her mother said something very insulting. This sentence completely angered Mar. I don't know if she doesn't want to accept the reality or suspects her mother of ulterior motives. Mar doesn't understand why her mother did this. Everything she did now is incomprehensible. If she still cares about herself in the slightest, she shouldn't have done this. Mar told her mother never to see her again. After saying this, she angrily turned around and left. At this time, her mother's head was already a bit uncomfortable. On the other side, Inwoo was immersed in the joy of love. He went out to work and happened to meet Jisoo and Hyami. In fact, the two of them guessed that Inwoo was Doyeon's boyfriend. After getting Doyeon's affirmative answer, Jisoo asked the most concerned question. Have the two of you slept together? That night, Mar's mother had a severe headache. She called her daughter's phone until she passed out, but the other party did not answer. The camera panned to Doyeon. This time, she was responsible for the funeral, which was Mar's mother's. She quickly found the funeral director who lost his son and said that if he felt uncomfortable, he could change another funeral director. The next day, Inwoo received an obituary for his ex-girlfriend's mother's death. It happened so suddenly that he didn't know what to do. At the funeral hall, Mar looked at his mother's photo and was stunned. The words of rejection kept echoing in his ears. He curled up in a corner. Inwoo received a call from Doyeon, informing him of Mar's mother's death. Inwoo confessed that he already knew and had told his uncle about it. His uncle was very surprised and lamented that it had happened so suddenly. Mar's mother told Doyeon that she had seen them on their date that day, and hoped that she could hear her wishes properly. No matter how unreliable a mother is, her greatest concern is still her child. She asked Doyeon how Mar was doing. Doyeon confessed that she looked very lonely. Her mother hopes that Doyeon can dispel her daughter's feelings and bring her back to her rightful place. At the funeral, Inwoo's uncle expresses his condolences to his ex-girlfriend on behalf of Inwoo and hopes that she will take care of herself. Doyeon, who was standing nearby, sees it all. After the funeral, she brings some food to her ex-girlfriend to comfort her and persuade her to eat something. That night, Inwoo picks Doyeon up from work at the bus stop. She is curious as to whether Inwoo did not go to the funeral because of her. Doyeon thinks that if he doesn't attend, he may regret it for the rest of his life. And it's normal to care about each other after dating for so long, but hopes that they can stop there. Doyeon also encourages Inwoo to definitely go. After the farewell ceremony the next day, Doyeon looks at Mar's back with a full of guilt, because she also likes Inwoo, so she rejected Mar's mother's wish. At this time, the number on the counter did not change. When Doyeon came to her senses, Inwoo appeared in front of her in a black suit. Mar had not shed a single tear at her mother's funeral, but burst into tears when she saw her ex-boyfriend. This scene was clearly visible to Doyeon. Mar's colleagues speculated that the chances of the two getting back together were very high. Back in her home country, people usually pretended not to know when they ran into each other after a breakup. If the marriage proposal had succeeded, they would have had a child by now. These unintentional remarks poked at Doyeon's heart. That was why she had deliberately avoided Inwoo all day, until he came back from work. Inwoo told Doyeon that he was actually very ashamed inside, because attending the funeral made him hear those messages. Inwoo asked Doyeon not to take it to heart and promised that he would not make her sad in the future. Mar was finally able to understand her mother's love and would not sink any lower. She hoped that her mother could leave in peace. At this time, the count changed from 5 to 4. Early the next morning, Doyeon met an elderly man who was not carrying any heavy objects, and the old man was Inwoo's grandmother. As soon as she entered the house, she resented her husband for not having a proper job and dragging their grandson down with him. In fact, the atmosphere in the shop had been bad for a few days. Inwoo sat in the courtyard to catch his breath. His grandmother came out to persuade him. Everyone should have a decent job, go back to being a doctor as soon as possible. Said his grandmother, don't let your mother worry any longer. Every mother will worry about their children. Apart from the unreliable uncle, everyone can empathize with Inwoo. I'll let you in on a secret. In a few days it will be the anniversary of Inwoo's younger brother's death. The next day, Doyeon and Inwoo go jogging together. Coincidentally, Grandma also wants to go. The three of them have a pleasant walk in the park. At first, the atmosphere is quite harmonious. Doyeon feels that Grandma has a very nice personality. Inwoo has told her frankly that his mother will also come in a few days because it will be her younger brother's death anniversary. It so happens that at this time, Grandma is a little thirsty. Inwoo gets up and goes to buy some water. Grandma took the opportunity to ask Doyeon how old she was, how many people were in her family, and what they did for a living. Doyeon immediately replied that she was a mortician. Grandma exclaimed that she could never imagine someone as beautiful as her doing such a horrible job. She thought that Doyeon, like her grandson, should find a decent job again. On the other side, Kihyun borrowed a screwdriver from his uncle. Unintentionally, he saw Inwoo's photo. The next picture brought his thoughts back to that rainy night, because Kihyun never imagined that the little boy in the car accident was Inwoo's younger brother. Grandma took out her phone to check the time, and Doyeon noticed the background picture on the screen. Isn't this the little boy who has been haunting her? It wasn't until then that Doyeon realized that the little boy haunting her was Inwoo's younger brother. She suddenly stood up and left without a word. It turned out that the door code was the date of Inwoo's younger brother's death. She felt really sorry for Inwoo for not realizing the identity of the little boy after so long. Meanwhile, Inwoo received a text message from Doyeon. He will meet her later. On the other side, Kihyun sat on the bed, filled with guilt and unease. He deliberately tried to get his uncle to confirm who the little boy was to Inwoo. After getting the other person's answer, he was indeed as he had guessed. The person who had a car accident that night was Inwoo's younger brother. Doyeon confessed to Inwoo that she had seen his younger brother's ghost before, because she was so scared at the time. she ran away. At this point, Inwo remembered that Doyeon had once mentioned to him that when he first started working, he met a child who was even more worried about others. Inwoo just wanted to know if his brother was okay, if he suffered a lot when he died, and if he had said anything. At the same time, Doyeon handed the ring to Inwoo. The moment he saw the ring, Inwoo's emotions could no longer be restrained. He held the ring against his chest, and the feelings of missing him and blaming himself welled up within him. In fact, on the night of the car accident, Ki-hun was the first to arrive at the scene. The car broke down, and since the driver was his brother, in a panic, Ki-hun didn't know what to do. After the second accident, a steel pipe pierced his brother's shoulder and neck bone. The next day, Uncle and Inwoo said goodbye to Grandma, but before getting into the car, Grandma still scolded her unreliable son. She repeatedly told Uncle not to lead Inwoo astray. That night, when Doyeon got off work, she met a colleague who was stealing food to give to her daughter, who was waiting outside. Coincidentally, Inwoo came to pick her up from work, so she didn't think much of it. On the way back, Inwoo told Doyeon that her grandmother had already gone home, and that her parents would be coming from the countryside the next day. In fact, Doyeon had gone to the countryside right after she got the ring. Unfortunately, she didn't find the address, but she remembered her younger brother saying that if she couldn't find the ring, she could ask the police at the crime scene. In fact, Inwoo never knew that there was a third person at the crime scene. On the other side, Ki-hun was called to the hospital by his supervisor to work on a case. Here, he accidentally bumped into Jisoo. Jisoo is now a senior nurse in intensive care. She told Doyeon the good news. However, Doyeon was waiting for the bus with Inwoo and had no time to listen to her. On the bus back, Inwoo stared out the window in a daze. The two returned to the store in an awkward silence. Doyeon didn't know how to comfort Inwoo, so he gave him a big hug. In fact, life is like a tree. The details of life are like the roots. There are millions of roots, some thick, some thin, intertwined and entangled. That afternoon, Doyeon met the daughter of a colleague again. She treated the girl to her favorite rice cake. Because her family was poor, the girl not only had no pocket money, but also no friends. However, she had a very great dream. The girl and Doyeon agreed that she would not tell her mother about this meeting. She also asked Doyeon to help her shoot a video of herself dancing. Jisoo met Taejin's ex-girlfriend in the bathroom. This person still looks so haggard. The baby's hands are covered in bruises from the needles. Doyeon is walking the girl home. The girl tells her that she usually cheats for her classmates. As long as there are no more than 2 mistakes, she can use their phones to watch the live broadcast of the dance. However, her mother nags about money every day and spends very little time with her. She asks Doyeon to help her make a video of herself singing, but Doyeon's shift has already started. The two agree to shoot together next weekend. Inwoo remembered what Doyeon had said, and asked his father if there had been a third person at the scene of the accident, such as a policeman. His father only knew that there were very few people on the street at night when the accident happened. In addition, he knew that the victim was not taken to the hospital immediately after the accident. The person who called the police was a man from the neighborhood, and he didn't know if the police had continued their investigation. That night, Inwoo confided in Doyeon that he had let his parents down too much. On the day of his younger brother's funeral, Inwoo arrived at the door. Because he felt so guilty, he even turned around and ran away. His parents were afraid that he would do something rash and did not manage to see their youngest son off for the last time. Doyeon reassured Inwoo. The most common thing she hears at work is that the living must go on. Before she became a funeral director, she found this very cruel, but only if the living live well can they remember the dead better. After Inwoo returned, he finally let go of his feelings. Tomorrow he will pay tribute to his brother with his family. His mother thinks that his younger brother would be very happy. The next day, his mother stroked her younger brother's photo, calling out his name over and over again, and cried so hard that she didn't have the strength to stand up. She didn't want to leave for a long time. Inwoo saw that Ki-hun was wearing too little, so he bought him a thick jacket. This was the first time Ki-hun had received a gift from someone since he was born. However, Inwoo's real reason for coming this time was to tell him that he was dating Doyeon. Ki-hun was stunned at first, and then he realized that the bastard that Doyeon liked was actually him. Inwoo said that he felt a sense of guilt for dating Doyeon secretly without telling Ki-hun. At this time, a colleague from the police station asked Ki-hun for something. Before leaving, Ki-hun told Inwoo that he truly treated him like a brother. As he was leaving the police station, Inwoo met the police officer who had handled his brother's car accident. He quickly asked the other person if there was a third person at the scene. The police officer remembered that a colleague had gone to handle it first, although the time of the call was a bit late. Inwoo's brother had already been taken to the hospital on their way there. In addition, he heard that the perpetrator was still in the intensive care unit. That night, another tragedy occurred: the funeral for the 40-year-old mother and daughter. Lucy, was handled by the landlord of the rented house. The little girl had never seen such a beautiful house before. There were so many exquisite cosmetics that she still thought it was a dream. Because she fell asleep while watching the video that Doyern had taken of her, the little girl was so afraid that she would suddenly wake up and everything would disappear. Soon, the news broadcasted this extreme child abuse case. Lucy learned about her death from Doyern's mouth. She couldn't believe that her mother would do such a thing. She begged Doyern to save her because she still had so many things she wanted to do. Doyern, unable to do anything, hugged her. The camera panned and Doyern touched Lucy's mother. However, her spirit did not appear. How did the magic fail? Doyern hurriedly found her uncle, the priest, and told him about it. Her uncle thought that Lucy's mother might not have been eligible to receive the gift. This person made a big mistake and chose to commit suicide. No matter who it is, no one can take another person's life. Doyern believes that what happened to her was not a blessing to the deceased. That day, Lucy asked Doyern to film her singing. What is the point of listening to the wishes of the dead? Even Inwo's brother's wish could not be fulfilled. If she had not run out that day, she could have listened to him say even one more sentence, and perhaps she could have conveyed it to Inwoo. Doyern cannot bear to see the person she loves suffer so much and not be able to do anything about it. Can someone like this really be a blessing to someone? Even the learned priest uncle was speechless this time. Doyern posted the video of dancing on social media according to the little girl's wish. The video spread online at a rapid speed. When Doyern asked Lucy why she wanted to dance, her answer was very simple. To earn a lot of money for my mother, so that she has time to spend with me. Then the two of us will live to be 100 together. A life that has not yet bloomed is about to fade. Happiness has not been experienced by humans and it comes to an abrupt end. Lucy is both afraid and unwilling as she steps forward into the unknown. At this moment, the counter changes from 4 to 3. Meanwhile, Ki-hun is waiting outside the intensive care unit to visit his brother. A nurse kindly reminds him that he can go in 10 minutes. The friend he sees every day is actually the brother of the murderer who destroyed his family. Inwoo can't believe his ears. Ki-hun is also stunned when he sees Inwoo. They stay in the same place for a long time. In the end, Ki-hun breaks the silence first. He didn't avoid it and admitted that the person lying in the hospital was his own brother. However, Inwoo didn't say a word and just turned around and left. Just as he passed by, Jisoo saw it. In fact, Ki-hun knew what had happened and quickly chased after him, but he was pushed away by Inwoo. Inwoo confessed that the person who was hit and killed by his brother was his own younger brother. After returning, no matter what his uncle asked Inwoo, he wouldn't say a word. After a while, Ki-hun also returned here. After the uncle understood the whole story, his pent-up emotions finally exploded. Their family fell apart because of Inwoo's younger brother's death, and they became heartbroken. All of this was thanks to Ki-hun's brother. Ki-hun bowed apologetically while wiping away tears from the corner of his eyes. He wanted to attend Inwoo's younger brother's funeral, but he didn't have the courage to do so. He also said that he shouldn't have let his brother leave the day of the incident. Inwoo heard this and asked Ki-hun to tell him all the details of that day. It turned out that Ki-hun, an intern police officer, had graduated from the police academy with the top score. The two brothers were so happy about this. His brother suggested that they celebrate today. Ki-hun wanted to refuse, but he couldn't resist his brother's enthusiasm. He suggested that they drink less today. His brother had the bad habit of drinking. In order to save money, he had not drunk for 78 days. Because of this problem, he was unable to marry his girlfriend. When he mentioned this, his brother brought out a few more bottles and placed them on the table. I don't know if it was the alcohol or if life had been too hard on him, but he complained that he didn't have a high school diploma, only a criminal record, and a mother who had died and made the news. His brother couldn't help but finish the drink in his hand in one gulp. Ki-hun noticed a scar on his brother's wrist. I wonder what memories it brings back. He also started drinking glass after glass. His brother praised Ki-hun for being successful and not wasting money. Even when they were in the orphanage, he never complained. The two of them drank a total of 7 bottles of wine during that meal. After Ki-hun paid the bill, he realized that his brother was gone. When they reached the three-way intersection, the tragedy had already happened. Ki-hun fell to his knees and took the blame for everything. He tearfully apologized to Inwoo. However, Inwoo ignored him and got up and left. Inwoo walked aimlessly down the street. He was still unable to get past the shadow of his brother's accident. That night, Jisoo found Doyern after work and told him about Inwoo visiting the perpetrator that day. Doyern quickly called Inwoo. The two met at a food stall. At this time, Inwoo was drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Doyern persuaded him to go home early. On the other side, Ki-hun sat in his room and reminisced about when he was little. Every time he had a headache, his mother would let him lie on her lap. The sense of security brought by maternal love made him forget his headache and fall asleep quickly. Pay attention to the scar on your mother's face, Inwoo muttered to the empty room. That child had a hard life. If his mother really is watching him from heaven, Please help her son. Inwo relayed the details of the accident to Doyeon. The person he saw every day and treated as an older brother was actually the relative of the murderer who killed his younger brother. Early the next morning, Ki-hun left a note and left. At this time, Tae-jun was distracted at work. Doyeon noticed his unusual behavior. Tae-jun explained that he had a nightmare last night. Before he finished speaking, he received a phone call. His ex-girlfriend's 2-year-old child had unfortunately died. As a mother, she couldn't accept the truth in front of her. She just wanted to be by her child's side even if it was just for an extra minute. His ex-girlfriend wanted the funeral home to hold the child's burial ceremony. Tae-jun couldn't tell you how difficult it was. Just then, his ex-girlfriend's old father stormed into the office. He blamed Tae-jun for bringing the child's body here, and said that it was all Tae-jun's funeral director's fault that caused this tragedy. You deliberately approached my daughter for the purpose of getting this business. The father became more and more angry, grabbed Tae-jun by the collar and cursed him. At the same time, Inwoo saw the note left by Ki-hun. This person had no face to say goodbye in person and left silently. The camera panned and Inwoo went to the police station. He wanted to check the surveillance video from the day of the accident, but the police couldn't find it no matter how hard they looked. The technician said that there was a system failure a few days ago and many files had disappeared. They had tried to restore them but it would take some time. Inwoo could only come back in a few days. On the other side, Tae-jun sat on the steps in silence. Doyeon approached him and tried to comfort him. However, he kept asking Doyeon if he regretted being in this line of work. Doyeon said directly that he regretted it a little. Tae-jun confessed that he regretted it many times. He thought that he could work in the company like everyone else, but every time after the funeral, he felt like the deceased was saying thank you to him, and that was probably the reason why he could keep going. To be there at the end of their lives to let their souls rest is the Undertaker's mission. Even though he has been an Undertaker for 20 years, Tae-jun still can't bear to see a little life end, so he understands why his ex-girlfriend's father is hysterical. A funeral is the end for the deceased but the beginning of their pain. As it turns out, Tae-jun was right. After letting out his anger, the old man sat in front of the funeral hall, lost in thought. He never expected that a white-haired man would be burying a black-haired child. His ex-girlfriend tightly hugged the quilt her daughter had used. Tae-jun knelt in front of her, carrying a bag. Inside the bag was a down jacket. Tae-jun promised to put it on the child when he was buried. That way, he wouldn't be cold in the winter. Holding the jacket, his ex-girlfriend cried and shook. Then Tae-jun helped him walk into the cremation room. This scene happened to be seen by Jisoo, who was delivering drinks. She didn't say anything and turned around and left. At the police station, the leader and colleagues talked about the loss of the video. Ki-hun suddenly seemed very nervous. That night, he stopped Doyeon. On the surface, he came to another place, but in fact, he wanted to ask Doyeon what Inwoo's purpose was when he went to visit the perpetrator in the hospital that day. However, Doyeon did not know the reason. The next day, while Inwoo was directing traffic, there was a traffic accident across the street, and the police officer in charge of the investigation happened to be Ki-hun. The camera pans and they are sitting in a coffee shop. Inwoo hopes that Ki-hun's brother is alive and is tormented by his conscience. This is the greatest punishment for him. He can never forgive him. Ki-hun blames himself for why it was Inwoo's younger brother who died and why it was his brother who caused the accident. He promises that he will try not to be in Inwoo's life in the future. Inwoo questions him about whether he heard what his younger brother said before he left. Ki-hun recalled that night, lying that if he had arrived earlier, he might have been able to hear what his brother had said. That night, Inwoo took Ki-hun back home. After Doyeon finished work, Inwoo and she chatted at a food stall, saying that it was their uncle and him who were too heartless. After all, the accident wasn't Ki-hun's fault. It seemed that Inwoo had forgiven him. However, later on, Ki-hun seemed to have something on his mind. Meanwhile, Jisoo finds Inwoo and asks him to do something for her, but she has to keep it a secret from Doyeon. After the funeral, Jisoo's ex-girlfriend sincerely thanks Tae-jun, who will always remember this kindness. Tae-jun stands there without saying much. Doyeon holds the gift that Tae-jun gave to his ex-girlfriend, which is a photo with a gem embedded in it. For every mother, her child is like her gem, shining and unique. Jisoo is very grateful to Doyeon for letting her daughter go in peace, and the father also let go of his prejudice against Tae-jun. Back at the office, Tae-jun received a phone call. He met with Inwoo without telling Doyeon. It turned out that Inwoo was delivering something for Jisoo, a pair of baby gloves. On the other side, Ki-hun's vital signs were rapidly disappearing. In fact, Ki-hun had long ago signed a consent form to forego treatment. The leader asked Jisoo to notify the family to see them for the last time. However, before she could even leave the ward, Ki-hun's heartbeat stopped. Ki-hun was the first to inform Inwoo after learning the news. The useless man was crying with a runny nose and was crouching on the roadside, crying particularly sadly. After hearing the news, Inwoo became silent. This meant that the case of his younger brother's traffic accident was closed. It seemed that he had thought of something and called Doyeon. Meanwhile, Ki-hun was sitting alone in front of the funeral hall. All his relatives have left him. He is now the only person left in the world. Do-yeon meets with In-woo. She guesses why In-woo has come to see her. Do-yeon says she may not be able to see Ki-hun's brother's spirit because she cannot awaken the spirits of those who have committed murder or committed suicide. The camera pans. Do-yeon's fingertips just touch Ki-hun's brothers. The morgue instantly turns into a dressing room. The counting board also appears here. Do-yeon told Ki-hun's brother about it. Like most spirits, he also had a lot of things he wanted to accomplish. At this time, she asked Ki-hun's brother if he remembered the car accident. After learning that the child had already left, Ki-hun's brother felt immense guilt. But what can he do now that he is dead? Do-yeon asked Ki-hun's brother who exactly hit and killed In-woo's brother, but the man said that his drinking caused the tragedy. It was obvious that he was lying. If what he said was true, there would be no way for him to meet Do-yeon here, but he insisted that he was the one who hit the boy. He also said that he was a wicked person who killed his father, and would never apologize for hitting a child to death. I thought he had some kind of secret. Do-yeon asked him to tell the truth and relay it to her, because this might be the last chance. Do-yeon relayed to In-woo about meeting the spirit. She lied and said that this person had already confessed 1,000 times without stopping, and that even after death, he would still have to pay for what he had done. In-woo was especially grateful to Do-yeon for these words, which would definitely allow his younger brother to rest in peace, and the scene of the two chatting was just seen by Ki-hun. In fact, on the night of the incident, when Ki-hun chased after him, his brother was still in the car. He was worried that something would happen and asked his brother not to drive. However, his brother did not care and slapped Ki-hun in the face. When he drinks, he's like a different person. To be on the safe side, Ki-hun ends up driving. His brother on the side takes a picture of the car registration certificate and gives it to someone else. In the car, his brother keeps complaining that his life is a mess and also mentions his father without meaning to. Ki-hun says it's all his fault. One detail here is that his brother wasn't wearing a seatbelt all the way along. His brother kept yelling that his brother was to blame for his situation. Just as Ki-hun got distracted, the tragedy happened. The next day, the police officer in charge of the accident suddenly remembered something. He first confirmed the relationship between the perpetrator and Ki-hun in the computer, and then hurriedly went out. That night, a woman came to the funeral. She was Ki-hun's brother's girlfriend, Hyeon. She drank a lot and poured out her heart to Do-yeon about the uncertainty of life. The boyfriend she had waited for 2 years just left like this. It turned out that the car registration photo that Ki-hun's brother had taken was sent to her. However, the message that was sent back to herself was full of typos. Hyeon felt so much remorse that she never thought he would drive drunk. If she had persuaded him not to drive, it might have been a different story. Just then, Ki-hun returned from seeing his guests off and interrupted their conversation. Do-yeon always felt that something was strange. In the morning, In-woo's mood improved a lot. He felt that the events of the past few days had been too heavy. Today, he wanted to make things easier for each other. In fact, today was Ki-hun's brother's funeral. Do-yeon handed Ki-hun a cigarette, which surprised Ki-hun greatly. How did Do-yeon know her brother's habit? And it was his favorite brand. Do-yeon lied that she guessed. She wanted to ask what happened, but the words stuck in her throat. After leaving, Do-yeon found Hyeon. She wanted to see the photo taken the night of the murder. Unfortunately, Ki-hun overheard her. That night, he kept thinking about Do-yeon handing him the cigarette and asking Hyeon for the photo. It turned out that the police had told Hyeon that the photo taken by Ki-hun's brother could not be used as evidence in the case. Do-yeon had been waiting for her to send it. Just then, In-woo sent an invitation to have dinner together. In fact, Do-yeon's father had specially delivered it during the day. He asked his uncle not to say that he had been here. After dinner, Do-yeon returned to the second floor and received a text message from Hyeon. Looking at the photo, the more she thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. So she quickly called the other party to ask why it could not be used as evidence. Hyeon confessed that at the time, she had given this photo to Ki-hun. At that time, he had just graduated from the police academy and was also doing an internship, so he thought of letting him submit it himself. But the police told Ki-hun that it could not be used as evidence. Even he himself could not figure out why. From the angle of the photo, it can be inferred that Ki-hun's brother was in the passenger seat when the photo was taken, which means that the murderer is someone else. At that moment, In-woo noticed Do-yeon, who was doing the comparison. He was curious why someone who didn't even have a driver's license was in the car. Do-yeon told In-woo about Hyeon comparing the photo, so In-woo decided to go to the police station tomorrow to confirm. The next day, a colleague stopped Ki-hun for a chat. It was already known that he had taken leave yesterday to attend his brother's funeral, but they were curious as to why he hadn't told the other colleagues. Ki-hun gave the excuse that as a policeman he didn't want people to know that he had a murderer for a brother. Meanwhile, a colleague received a text message from In-woo requesting a meeting. In-woo asked him if there were any other perpetrators in the accident. The policeman immediately dismissed the idea. In-woo then asked if there was any information about the dashcam. According to the results of the police's investigation, The memory card in the car at the time was stolen, and conducted a authenticity verification, but could not determine whether there was anyone else in the car at the time. The police station has applied to restore the data from the road surveillance video from that day, but it is not known how long it will take. However, Inwo will be notified as soon as there is any news. That night, Inwo met Ki-hun. The two of them sat together and chatted. Inwo asked him if he had watched the surveillance video from that day or if anyone got out of the car. Ki-hun lied and said that there was no one else at the scene. Just my brother and your younger brother. Inwo confessed that the real culprit may be someone else. This sentence scared Ki-hun. He hurriedly asked if new physical evidence or witnesses had been found. I personally feel that Inwo was giving Ki-hun a chance to confess. Inwo wanted Ki-hun to help him look at the documents related to the accident. It just so happened that Ki-hun was in charge of this area. However, he refused Inwo's help. On the way home, Ki-hun looked at the roadside cameras in a daze. It turned out that after the accident that day, Ki-hun was the first to wake up, and he quickly got out of the car to check on Inwo's brother's condition. He kept hearing the voice of the person who had just been ranked first in the police academy and was about to be assigned to a job. Unfortunately, there was a surveillance camera right above his head. Before the camera could turn around, he quickly opened the car door, dragged his brother from the passenger seat to the driver's seat, and then released the handbrake. Just as Ki-hun was about to escape, Inwo's brother grabbed his pants leg and sent out a distress call. He saw that the camera was about to turn around, and at the same time, the car began to roll downhill. He tried to stop the car, but the situation gradually began to spin out of control, and this is how the second accident happened. Ki-hun ignored the lives of others and unplugged the memory card from the drive recorder and disappeared into the night. After the investigation was over, as a family member, he could view the surveillance footage at the time of the incident. Ki-hun saw that he was captured fleeing, but happened to be chatting with an old colleague and didn't notice. So Ki-hun gave up his position in the big city and came to this police station to work as an accident traffic police officer. His goal was to delete this accident video that had been shelved. Ki-hun returned to the rental house and collapsed on the floor. He kept reminding himself that all the incriminating evidence had been deleted, but he was still trembling with fear. Early the next morning, as Doyeon passed by Ki-hun's door, the words Hyeon had said kept echoing in his ears. She summoned up her courage and knocked on the door. However, there was no answer. Doyeon called Ki-hun again, but he hung up. At this time, Ki-hun was reviewing the case file to see if there was any evidence he had missed. He had forgotten to delete the evidence against himself. Just then, his boss told him to investigate the video of the accident in front of the church. Ki-hun investigated until nightfall and left just in time to meet Doyeon going to pray. Doyeon told his uncle that he suspected that the murderer was not Ki-hun's brother, because the person was sitting in the passenger seat instead of the driver's seat. He was not sure if it was the person he knew. The two's conversation was heard clearly by Ki-hun, who had followed them. He remembered that the pack of cigarettes Doyeon gave him was his brother's favorite brand. From this moment on, he really panicked. On the other side, Inwo received a call from the police. It turned out that he had shown the photo to the police earlier that day. However, the police had no recollection at all. This time, they called because they had made a new discovery. Ki-hun was sitting by the river and had drunk a lot. When he was young, his dream was to become a police officer. When he grew up, he could arrest the bad guys. The happy time of the mother and son came to an end with the return of the father. The alcoholic father suspected that his wife had an affair with someone else and gave birth to Ki-hun. His father even used obscene language in front of Ki-hun and strangled his wife to death. After that, instead of feeling the slightest bit of remorse, he blamed Ki-hun for everything. He didn't care at all about Ki-hun, who was kneeling on the ground begging for mercy. Just then, his older brother, who had returned from school, grabbed his father's hand holding the knife. During the struggle, the older son's wrist was cut. It wasn't until then that he saw his mother lying on the ground, not breathing. It turned out that the surveillance video data from the police station had been recovered. After careful inspection, it was discovered that there was indeed a third person that night. Meanwhile, Doyeon happened to encounter Ki-hun when she returned. She had been meaning to ask Ki-hun something during the day. Before Doyeon could say anything, Ki-hun closed in on her step by step. Doyeon realized something was wrong and, scared, turned her head away. Inwo, on the other hand, left the police station and was walking home. Ki-hun was already acting a little strange at this point. He acted like he wouldn't let her go unless she told him. Doyeon had no choice but to confess that she had seen his brother. In that moment, fear, panic, and confusion filled Ki-hun's heart. In-woo, on the other hand, took his time to make a phone call. At this moment, Ki-hun used all his strength to strangle Doyeon's neck. This look was exactly the same as when his father strangled his mother that year. He had lost his mind. It wasn't until Doyeon stopped struggling and almost fainted. Ki-hun then came to his senses and realized what he had just done. The scene of his father choking his mother to death kept replaying in his mind. Just then, In-woo rushed back. Seeing Doyeon slumped on the ground, He quickly ran over to check on him. Kihan saw that something was wrong and took off running. Doyeon didn't care about himself and told Inwo to go after Kihan. She then found her uncle and told him to call the police. At this time, Kihan was running for his life. Inwo was in hot pursuit. Kihan reached the rooftop of the building first. He remembered just now he had strangled Doyeon, and Inwo's younger brother as well as his own mother. His childhood dream was to become a police officer thanks to his brother's hard work to support his studies. His dream came true. However, Kihan used his brother to fake the scene of the accident. Just then, Inwo pulled him down. He always wanted to say something to Kihan's brother, asking him not to die. Only by living can he suffer from the pain of guilt for the rest of his life. Now Inwo gives this sentence to Kihan. Kihan says that he just wants to live like a normal person. If he keeps hoping sincerely, then his wish will come true. Inwo can tell that he still wants to argue. Early the next morning, Kihan is already in the detention center, but he won't say anything. The police officer in charge of the accident plans to reinvestigate the case. That night, Doyeon comes to visit Kihan in the detention center. Kihan kept apologizing for his rude behavior. However, Doyeon did not come this time to hear apologies. Instead, she conveyed a message from Kihan's brother. It turned out that on the day of the funeral, his brother learned that Doyeon knew Kihan and asked her to give him a message. The person who made his brother end up in this situation was not his younger brother, but himself. So don't think about your brother. Don't think about your father either. Just do what you want to do and live happily. Don't take to heart the hurtful things your brother said. My brother will take all the secrets with him and leave. Doyeon also told Kihan that in fact, my brother could hear what he said in the intensive care unit, and the whole time, my brother kept saying that he was the one driving the car. Kihan couldn't control his emotions when he heard this. He never imagined that my brother would rather die and bear the crime of murder for himself. The next day, Doyeon found the memory card of the car's black box on the day of the incident as instructed by Kihan. He didn't have the courage to turn himself in, nor did he have the courage to throw it away. So he hid it. Kihan hoped that Doyeon could help him hand himself in to the police. Only then did Inwo and his uncle really figure out what had happened on the day of the accident. The prosecution wanted to charge Kihan with multiple offenses, including driving while intoxicated, murder, hit and run, and tampering with evidence. Before the trial, Kihan wanted to see one more person. He told Inwo that no matter what happened, he would live on. Ever since Inwo figured out the whole story about his brother's car accident, he had locked himself in his room. Even though his uncle tried everything he could, Inwo refused to come out of his room. That day, Doyeon handed a bouquet of flowers to his uncle and asked him to give it to Inwo. Doyeon didn't plan to go in to comfort him. He just wanted to wait for him to come out on his own. That night, Inwo was sitting by the bed when he heard his brother calling out to him in a daze. He said that it was good to be able to see his brother here, and that they could finally watch the stars together. At that moment, the counter went from 2 to 1. Inwo woke up from his dream and immediately found Doyeon. Doyeon gave him a big hug. This scene happened to be seen by an uncle passing by. Early the next morning, his uncle handed Doyeon a can of extra-large beer. Many things have come to an end. Doyeon has at least helped solve most of them. Doyeon curiously asked her uncle if she would tell her the secret about these hands if she met the last undead. Her uncle didn't give her an answer. The scene changed. Doyeon gathered with her two best friends. Jisoo sent Taejun a gift card on her phone. The reply she received was only a short thank you very much, but the two periods at the end made her happy beyond words, so she mustered her courage and stopped Taejun. This time, Taejun didn't refuse Jisoo's invitation to have dinner together. The store was getting more and more commissions from the streets. Her uncle suggested prioritizing important customers. That afternoon, as soon as Doyeon returned to his father's house, he saw his uncle and Inwo helping with the kimchi fermentation. However, the amount of work this time was a bit intimidating. There were 200 pounds of it. Since 70 jars weren't enough last year, this year Doyeon's father was going to make 200 jars. This day was exhausting for everyone. Doyeon's father suggested treating them to dinner that night. As for how his father knew about it, just look at the expression on his uncle's face. Just then, Doyeon's father received a call from a colleague at the security office. His daughter suddenly fainted and needs to go to the hospital right away. He hopes that Doyeon's father can take his shift. Listening to the desperate plea on the phone, Doyeon's father lied to the others in the house that his friend had an accident and he had to go to the hospital. He would not be back tonight. The pregnant woman, who was about to give birth, was paralyzed on the ground due to abdominal pain. That night, when Doyeon's father took over the shift, Inwoo insisted on giving him a ride. In fact, when Doyeon's father was still a child, he had fantasized many times, wondering what kind of guy she would date in the future, whether he would or wouldn't. He was unable to sleep at night, but when he saw Inwoo and Doyeon together, he was still very happy. As for the job as a security guard in the residential area, Doyeon's father thought the longer he did it, the more reluctant he would be to leave, so he probably wouldn't resign. Soon they arrived at the entrance to the residential area. Inwo handed Doyeon's father a scarf. The two men became much closer. That night, the kind pregnant woman gave Doyeon's father some roasted sweet potatoes. Doyeon's father looks at the sweet potatoes and remembers when his wife was pregnant with Doyeon. At the time, he even joked about whether their daughter would look like a sweet potato. Just then, Doyeon calls to ask how her father is doing and reminds him to leave some food on the table. On the other side of the line, Inwoo receives a text from his ex-girlfriend, who wants to meet up with him. Ma came this time mainly to tell Inwoo that she is going abroad for further studies, and while packing, she found what was originally Inwoo's stethoscope. Will Inwoo choose to return to the medical profession? The next day, Doyeon takes the wrong bus. While waiting for the next one, she sees her father and follows him. Doyeon's father has changed into his security guard uniform and is helping a pregnant woman sort the rubbish. He is also helping students get rid of their unwanted books. Doyeon sees all this and turns away without saying a word. Dong-hyuk quickly catches up with his daughter and tries to explain. However, Doyeon still leaves without turning around. As soon as she turned around, she found her uncle. Doyeon felt so stupid. Her father had always thought he was studying. In fact, he was working in a small security booth to support Doyeon. Doyeon didn't want to lie to her father anymore and decided to move back home to live with him. The next day, Doyeon told Taejun that she was resigning. At the same time, she also told Inwoo the news. Taejun promised to work until a new employee was hired. At this time, Doyeon's father used his body to block a giant flower pot that was falling. He successfully protected a pregnant woman while dying on the spot. The last ghost to make a wish turned out to be Doyeon's father. His uncle rushed to the funeral, his eyes red with tears, unable to believe what he was seeing. Doyeon could no longer control her emotions and sat on the ground. She and her uncle embraced and wept, lamenting that poor father didn't deserve this. At that moment, Jasa and Hyami also arrived. They saw that Doyeon had already broken down, and they cried even more sadly. Fortunately, the pregnant woman who had been rescued was taken to the hospital and gave birth to triplets. Many citizens spontaneously came to the security booth to mourn this ordinary hero. The next day, everyone was busy entertaining the mourners. Doyeon went to the morgue to personally see her father off for the last time. Inwoo understood Doyeon's feelings and stayed outside alone to guard her. Doyeon saw her dead father and cared about whether he was in pain at that time. While saying that it didn't hurt, the father wiped away Doyeon's tears. He was worried that his child could not bear this and became painful and restless. In fact, Doyeon's father had been praying that he could see his daughter one more time before he left, even if it was just for a minute, because he had not properly said goodbye to Doyeon. Dong-hyuk couldn't help but think of his daughter's crying when she was first born, the first time he clumsily braided her hair, her first tooth change, and the time when Doyeon got first place in her exams. Dong-hyuk tells his daughter that she still has a long life ahead of her. Right now, they can only cherish every moment they have together. Outside the door, Taejun thinks it's time to prepare Doyeon for the funeral. Doyeon has already been in there for 3 hours. Inwoo begs Taejun to give Doyeon more time. Dong-hyuk ties Doyeon's ponytail for the last time. This is the most beautiful ponytail he has ever done in the past 25 years. Doyeon can't bear to see her father leave like this. She didn't want to let go of her father's hand. Dong-hyuk also wanted to chat with his daughter every day, laughing while watching TV. He also wanted to see his daughter get married and have children. He wanted to see his daughter slowly become an old lady. However, his own departure was just a part of life. It was an unbreakable law of nature. Everyone was destined to see their parents off for the last time. This was the law of nature. It was just that for Doyeon. It was a little too early. Dong-hyuk hoped that after he left, his daughter would not be too sad. When he gets there, he will definitely brag to his mother that he raised his daughter so beautifully. Dong-hyuk's wish is for his daughter to live a good life with a good person, to live a happy life. Doyeon still wants to catch up, but is loudly rebuked by her father. This side is not a place where his daughter can come, although Doyeon's father pretends to leave with style. Doyeon's cry of dad breaks the defenses of this middle-aged man in his 50s. Then Dong-hyuk's cry of goodbye means forever. It also meant that Doyeon would never again have her father's company. At that moment, the number on the counter changed from 1 to 0. The uncle slowly poured a glass of wine and muttered to Doyeon's father's photo, "My sister just passed away and Doyeon was born." Soon after, he left Doyeon's father's place and went to the church. The uncle couldn't understand why Doyeon's father took care of him. At that time, he had a huge appetite and could eat a bag of rice a month. However, his father never complained. To his uncle, his father was like a father. He should have gone out on dates and found a new partner, but he was worried that Doyeon would affect his future marriage, so he brought up the child alone for 25 years. At this time, a woman who helped clean the house caught the attention of his uncle, so he went up and asked about the woman's relationship with his father. It turned out that the woman was the mother of the pregnant woman. She knew that it was rude for her to visit like this and that no one would welcome her, but she hoped to help in some way. After finishing her errands, She left immediately. Uncle was very grateful that she came to pay her condolences to Doyen's father. The woman apologized profusely after hearing this. On the other side, the three girlfriends laid together, reminiscing about the wallets and other items that Doyen's father had made for them. Doyen could not hide her sadness and had to close her eyes not to deliberately remember the past. At the funeral the next day, the uncle who was responsible for the eulogy choked several times and finally collapsed in front of Doyen's father's grave and wept aloud. The camera panned to Inwoo accompanying Doyen back to her father's house. Doyen had just entered the door and in a daze saw the figure of her father, but when she looked closely, the room was empty and there was nothing in it. Every item in the house had memories of her father. Doyen's tears flowed unconsciously. That night, Doyen's uncles came to the door, saying that they were worried about leaving the two of them alone together. In fact, they were there to comfort Doyen. They ate and chatted while Doyen's uncle asked Inwoo to go out with him to buy some drinks. As soon as they stepped outside, Doyen's uncle thanked Inwoo for being there for Doyen before her father passed away. He said, "It's really good that you could meet her. Please take good care of Doyen." That night, Doyen couldn't sleep, so she looked through the things her father had left her. Just as her uncle woke up, they found a passbook in the box. It was the money her father saved from his part-time job. He wanted to buy his daughter some furniture for her wedding. If he could work a few more years, he might even be able to buy her a car. He happily told her uncle that Doyen seemed to have found the right person. Doyen being happy was her father's greatest wish in life. The next morning, Doyen asked someone at the store to give out the kimchi her father had preserved, so that people would remember an ordinary hero. Taejun suggested that Doyen temporarily switch positions so that he could prepare for the civil service exam. His actions could not help but remind Doyen of her father. Her father had once saved 4 lives. Helping others save each other's lives is a very meaningful thing for Doyen. So Doyen continued to return to the funeral home and worked as a funeral director. One day she received a phone call from an elderly man suffering from a terminal illness. The old man, knowing that his time was running out, wanted to ask about the funeral expenses for his only son who would be left behind. But the old man only had 1,000,000 won, which was not even enough for the most economical package. Doyen lied and said it was enough and left her mobile phone number. The uncle cut off his long hair and got dressed with Inwoo. He went to talk about cooperation, while Inwoo went to the hospital to be the aspiring emergency doctor he wanted to be. Jisoo and Taejun seemed to have become closer. Ki-hun was sentenced to 12 years in prison for various crimes in the first trial. He also expressed his respect for the judge's verdict and would not appeal. Uncle Priest opened the fire notebook. The first person to stop and call the police that night, the taxi driver who searched for his son for 20 years. The salesman who risked his life to turn on the fire alarm, the husband who left 100 million won for his wife. And the chef who turned off the gas valve to prevent a major explosion was Jisoo's grandmother. The security guard couple who chose to delay their escape to save others were the loving elderly couple. The factory employee who accurately reported the location of the survivors was the grandmother who quit smoking for her grandson. The firefighter who gave his oxygen mask to someone else was the father who lost his daughter. Inwoo's hands were also burned at this time, and it all had to do with Doyen's mother. It turned out that Inwoo and Doyen's father met at that time, and the two met again many years later. Doyen's father received 2 notifications on the day of the fire. One was his daughter's birth certificate, the other was his wife's death notice. Oh yes, and the doctor who successfully saved the baby. The kindness and beauty of these people's actions successfully created a miracle. Perhaps this is the real reason why Doyen can see the dead. After that, Doyen lost her special abilities at work, but she took her job of preparing the deceased more seriously. One day, when Doyen was showing a new employee around the workplace, her colleague, who had been working there for 15 years, bolted out the door. In no time, he found a priest. He claimed that after touching the deceased, he saw the deceased awake. His uncle then asked if he had seen any numbers. And that's the end of today's story. Thank you for your support and company.